Chapter 299. Seeing Chun-Shi emerge from the side with a smile, Wang Shiwu could not help but be taken aback. Is he not allowing his wife to shake hands with other men? To be honest, Chun-Shi's action was indeed a little rude, and it would make him seem very narrow-minded. After all, it was a social occasion. Wang Shiwu wanted to shake hands with Qin Ruoying, who was meeting for the first time, only out of courtesy. But Chun-Shi's reaction, Wang Shiwu was stunned for a moment, and he could only smile awkwardly. Then he turned to shake Chun-Shi's hand. They were all friends, and Chun-Shi had attended his and Fong Lei's wedding before, so Wang Shiwu naturally could not be angry over such a small matter. Mr. Chun, you're so lucky. Your wife is so beautiful, and she gave birth to such a cute and obedient daughter for you. I'm so envious. Wang Shiwu smiled and said a few polite words to Chun-Shi. But after Chun-Shi heard this, he looked at Wang Shiwu thoughtfully, then replied with a fake smile, "Thank you." After that, he withdrew his right hand. Such an impolite behavior really made Wang Shiwu a little confused. Luckily, he had a good temper. If it were a hot-tempered second-generation rich kid, he would have flipped out and smashed the bowl. What kind of attitude is this? Chun-Shi's behavior made the atmosphere a little awkward, and at this time, Fong Lei's voice suddenly came from the side. What? Ying is beautiful, but I'm not. She glanced at Wang Shiwu with a smile that was not a smile. She put on a jealous look, which immediately livened up the atmosphere. Beautiful? Of course you're beautiful. Your doormates are all very good-looking. Hearing this, Wang Shiwu immediately laughed, and then went with the excuse Fong Lei gave him. Then, Fong Lei asked everyone to take a seat, and the topic finally returned to the three women. Qin Ruoying chatted with Fong Lei for a while. When the waiter came to ask if the dishes could be served, Qin Ruoying seemed to have thought of something. She quickly asked, "By the way, Xian, where's your boyfriend? Why don't I see him?" Hearing this, Lin Xian immediately explained with a smile, "He has to work overtime tonight, so he can't make it." "I'm sorry, it's nothing, Xian. I was just asking." Qin Ruoying nodded. She and Chun-Shi were both unemployed, so she naturally had to understand the difficulties of office workers, so she didn't continue to ask. "Where's Lulu? Didn't you call her? She said she would rush over as soon as she got off work. She should be here soon." Fong Lei looked down at the time on her phone and found that it was almost 6 o'clock in the evening, so she turned to look outside the door. Sure enough, not long after her voice fell, two figures walked in from outside the door. One of them was Wang Lu, and the other, it was Li Xiaowen, who came uninvited. The moment she saw Li Xiaowen appear, Lin Xian frowned a little unnaturally. Qin Ruoying noticed the strangeness on Lin Xian's face, but she couldn't figure out the relationship between them, so she asked softly, "Is that Wang Lu's husband?" No, he's Wang Lu's boss. He could be considered as Lin Xian's suitor. He's been pursuing her for several years." Oh. Hearing this, Qin Ruoying nodded thoughtfully. She hadn't participated in such a social occasion for a long time. It felt so complicated. After Wang Lu and Li Xiaowen entered, they went straight to the second floor. Li Xiaowen's family and Fong Lei's family had some business dealings, so when Fong Lei got engaged, Li Xiaowen also received an invitation. In a sense, all these years, because of Wang Lu, Li Xiaowen and Fong Lei could be considered friends. Therefore, when Li Xiaowen came to the second floor, he went straight to Fong Lei and said to her with a smile, "I heard from Lulu that you're having dinner here today. Coincidentally, I don't have anything going on tonight, so I wanted to shamelessly come over and freeload a meal. You don't mind, right?" "Of course not. Please sit anywhere." Then, Fong Lei pointed to the empty seat on the side. Li Xiaowen seemed to be very familiar with Wang Shiwu, so after greeting everyone with a smile, he sat directly next to Wang Shiwu. Lin Xian just so happened to be standing opposite him. Seeing this, Lin Xian's face suddenly turned cold. Without saying a word, she got up and sat next to Qin Ruoying, then pulled Qin Ruoying aside and whispered to her. As the host, Fong Lei saw everything clearly. Therefore, she could only sigh silently in her heart. It was a dormitory gathering. Why did it suddenly turn out like this? Fong Lei booked a Western-style long table banquet tonight. The distance between each seat was very wide, so during the meal, there was a clear dividing line on the table. On one side was Chun Shi's family of 3 and Lin Xian. On the other side was Fong Lei and her husband, followed by Wang Lu and Li Xiaowen. Wang Lu tried to lead the topic to Lin Xian several times, but Lin Xian acted as if she did not hear it all. She was focused on serving the little guy food, making the little guy happy. Dinner began under such a strange atmosphere. Ever since Li Xiaowen appeared, Lin Xian did not speak loudly. Everyone could see that she was very unhappy tonight. Seeing Lin Xian's bad attitude, Li Xiaowen's patience seemed to have reached its limit. Therefore, after a quick dinner, he directly said goodbye. Wang Lu could not stop him. In the end, she could only send him off with Fong Lei. Li Xiaowen stood outside the entrance of the residence. He looked at the second floor, where Lin Xian was with a complicated expression. Then, as if he had finally made a decision, he put away the smile on his face and turned to leave quickly. Looking at Li Xiaowen's back as he left, even Fong Lei could not help but scold Wang Lu. "Lulu, what's wrong with you? Is this how you flatter people? You know that Xian doesn't like Li Xiaowen. Do you really think that Xian will be moved by your efforts to let Xian meet Li Xiaowen? Don't be stupid, okay? If you continue to interfere with Xian's feelings, we can't even be friends anymore." After saying that, Fong Lei went back to the residence angrily, leaving Wang Lu standing outside the door in a daze. It was a dormitory gathering, but she turned it into a failed blind date. The dinner ended in this extremely unpleasant atmosphere. Wang Lu drove back by herself. Lin Xian came by taxi, so Fong Lei offered to give Lin Xian a ride, but was rejected by Lin Xian. Qin Ruoying held the little girl's hand and stood beside Qin Shi. After watching Lin Xian get into the taxi and leave, she asked curiously, "Shi, what's wrong with you? I feel that you're a little weird tonight." Hearing that, Chun Shi smiled and shook his head. He held her hand and said softly in her ear, "I feel that something big is going to happen tonight. How about this? You bring Yin back first. I'll go check on the situation. I'll be back soon." "Something big?" Qin Ruoying was stunned for a moment. Then a worried expression appeared on her face. Seeing that, Chun Shi smiled and touched her cheek. He comforted her gently. "Don't worry. I'm here." Chapter 300. In Chun Shi's eyes, the night seemed calm, but in fact it was turbulent. That was because he actually found a similarity between Wang Shiwu and Li Xiaowen, 2 famous second-generation princes in Zhonghai. There were signs of spiritual energy fluctuations in their bodies. This was obviously not a coincidence. The 2 of them could be considered old acquaintances, so Chun Shi was very sure that in the past 6 months, something must have happened to them. While shaking hands with Wang Shiwu, Chun Shi quietly put a trace of true yuan into his body, and then carefully studied it. Then he found that Wang Shiwu should have practiced some kind of cultivation method, and there was obviously some impure true yuan accumulated in his body. But what made Chun Shi feel a little strange was that this true yuan had a bit of a strange and evil feeling. Since Chun Shi returned to Earth, he had already seen a lot of incomplete inheritances unique to Earth. Great-granduncle was a martial artist. Sunwin was a necromancer. Saitu Aijiro was a onmyoji, and there was also the Brahmin. Although these inheritances were incomplete, they could still be considered as orthodox, and, in the end, they could step into the celestial being. The celestial being, in the eyes of immortal cultivators, was the pseudo-core realm, and was only one step away from condensing the golden core. The reason why they could not go further was mainly because of the environmental limitations of Earth. From a scientific point of view, under the action of natural selection, the mutation of a mutated individual who was more adaptable to the environment was a beneficial mutation, and thus they could continue to survive. And the mutation of a mutated individual who was not adapted to the environment was a disadvantageous mutation, unable to adapt to the environment. They were destined to be eliminated by the environment. Therefore, no matter what kind of creature it was, in the end, it was inseparable from the 4 words natural selection, survival of the fittest. In the case of being eliminated at any time, great-granduncle placed all his hopes on the illusory divine gate, and talented people like Sun when tried to rely on their own efforts to continue to move forward. As long as he could go further, he was willing to pay any price, even if it meant killing innocent people. For example, the extremely evil 5 elements soul cultivation technique. One had to know that evil and filth were existences that were rejected by cultivators. It wasn't that this kind of cultivation method couldn't be cultivated, but it was because this kind of cultivation method usually went against ethics and principles. It was even harmful to the heavens and devoid of humanity. There were no taboos in doing things, and everything was done only for oneself. Therefore, this type of immortal cultivator was also called heretical cultivators. In the heavenly jade world, heretical cultivators were like street rats. They were hated by everyone. However, the environment was against evil cultivators, but their legacies were still being passed down. The main reason was that the evil path was faster, stronger, and easier to survive than the traditional cultivation methods. Yin-Yang masters used their blood essence to water Yin souls and create spirit-branded retainers that were related to their lives. This method was indeed a bit unorthodox compared to necromancers and martial artists, but it wasn't considered evil. After all, Yin-Yang masters only used their own blood essence to nourish their spirit-branded retainers, while Yin-Yang masters used their own blood essence and divine sense to strengthen themselves. The two could not be compared at all. Up until now, Chun-Shi only knew of Sun Wen's 5 elements soul cultivation technique that could truly be considered evil on Earth. But Sun Wen had already been subdued by him. Now, in addition to enduring the torture of the heart devouring ants every day, he also had to work day and night for Wu Yan for free. So the question was, who was the heretical cultivator behind Wang Shiwu and Li Xiaowen? Since these two were young masters with a certain social status, it meant that many people in their circle had already fallen into the hands of the heretical cultivator. The reason why the heretical cultivator chose the second generation was probably because of their social influence. After all, it was easier to commit heinous crimes without being noticed by others with power and influence. Perhaps it was because he cultivated an evil cultivation method. Li Xiaowen's behavior tonight was clearly a bit out of place. Logically speaking, it wasn't the first time that he was ignored by Lin Xian. He should have been mentally prepared. But when Li Xiaowen left, he suddenly looked meaningfully at Lin Xian. At that moment, his gaze was indeed very complicated. Thinking of this, Chun-Shi could not help but secretly sigh. Actually, in his heart, Li Xiaowen was quite a good person. No matter what, Li Xiaowen had wholeheartedly pursued Lin Xian for many years. Even if he had many flaws, he was not as unforgivable as Zhao Yuan. But now, Li Xiaowen's patience seemed to have finally run out. The two young masters who couldn't get along with each other had now become locusts on the same rope. Holding hands, they walked further and further away on the road of death. Wang Shiwu should have started cultivating earlier than Li Xiaowen, so his cultivation was obviously higher than Li Xiaowen's. Therefore, after some consideration, Chun-Shi secretly left a restriction on Lin Xian's body and turned to leave with Wang Shiwu. Wang Shiwu and Fang Lei were not officially married yet, so they did not live together. Therefore, after he drove Fang Lei home, he turned around and returned to his own house. Chun-Shi flew in the air and followed Wang Shiwu all the way. Chun-Shi could not be more familiar with Zhonghai. Therefore, after seeing Wang Shiwu drive into a high-end residential area by the river, Chun-Shi could not help but sneer. As the end of the Yangtze River, there were a total of 40 rivers in Zhonghai. Because there were too many rivers, even the natives of Zhonghai City didn't know the name of each river. There was only one exception, and that was the inland river in front of Chun-Shi called Chai River. The name Chai River was widely spread among the older generation, and it could be said that there was no one who did not know of it. The reason why Chai River was so famous was mainly because of its other name, Yin-Yang River. It was said that many people died here during the War of Resistance, and corpses and blood filled the entire Chai River. Therefore, this place had always been gloomy and filled with hostility. Many people scoffed at this legend. That was because they completely ignored the cemetery of martyrs that covered an area of about 200,000 square meters, this cemetery of martyrs was now called Longhua Garden, but 60 years ago, it had another famous name, Bloodflower Garden. Blood dyed the Huaxia red. The hostility was indeed heavy. After decades of development, the Bloodflower Garden went from a suburb to the current city center, and the mountains of corpses and seas of blood seemed to be covered by the dust of history. From the current perspective, the residential area where Wang Shiwu lived was actually not bad. Facing the Chai River, it was quiet in the midst of chaos, and it had a unique flavor. However, if one looked down from the sky, they would find that this residential area faced the Inyang River and had the Bloodflower Garden behind it. It was simply a place where evil gathered. The residential area was called Longhua Villa, and it was a high-end area. Some of it were bungalows, while the rest were all detached villas. Since it was a detached villa, there was naturally a small garden in each villa. Chunshi silently landed outside Wang Shiwu's garden and silently watched Wang Shiwu park the car and then return to the villa door. However, the moment Wang Shiwu opened the door, Chunshi's line of sight, unimpeded, went directly from the front yard to the back garden. Seeing through the entire villa at a glance, one had to know that from the perspective of feng shui, this kind of house layout was legendary. Heart-piercing evil spirit, the number one evil spirit of the Yang Mansion. Chapter 301. The place where the living lived was called the Yang Residence, and the place where the dead lived was called the Yin Residence. Since it was a place where the living lived, it naturally had to pay attention to feng shui. The so-called heart-piercing evil spirit actually referred to the kind of residence where one could see the other end of the house at a glance while standing outside the door. As one of the 10 great evil spirits of feng shui, heart-piercing evil spirit had been a taboo existence for the people of Huaxia since ancient times. Now that the real estate industry was at its peak, the architectural design profession naturally became a popular profession. Not to mention the local architectural designers of Huaxia. Even those famous foreign designers who didn't know much about the traditional culture of Huaxia would absolutely not be stupid enough to design a house with heart-piercing evil spirit pattern. After all, feng shui was something passed down by the ancestors and was an indispensable and important part of Huaxia's culture. If the developer really wanted to sell a house with heart-piercing evil spirit pattern in Huaxia, it was estimated that before the official opening, the sales department would be filled with rees by some nosy old people. Although there were many young people who didn't understand this, and some of them wanted to pursue something different and wanted to knock down a wall in their own house and forcibly create a heart-piercing evil spirit pattern. Then the renovation company or workers with some experience should also kindly remind them, don't court death. Of course, the more auspicious the house, the better. Although living in a house with heart-piercing evil spirit didn't mean that one would be unlucky. But if they were really unlucky, who would they blame? They could only blame themselves for being too stubborn at that time. Longhua Courtyard faced the Inyang River and backed by the Bloodflower Garden. This location itself was very bad, and if the heart-piercing evil spirit pattern was added, where was the Yang residence? It was clearly a place of great evil that even the dead didn't want to stay in. As the saying goes, a fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. These seemingly mysterious and superstitious cultural inheritances were actually like the lunar calendar. It was knowledge that the ancestors used thousands of years to accumulate. In Chun Shi's view, feng shui was actually the simplest application of array. Why was the feng shui of Longhua Courtyard said that the feng shui was bad? Mainly because the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in this place was extremely sparse. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth was the foundation of all things, and this place was perfectly round, forming a sealed space. The heaven and earth spirit chi from the outside couldn't come in, and the yin and evil chi accumulated inside. If ordinary people stayed here for a long time, it was easy for them to get sick. This was the so-called yang deficiency in Chinese medicine. Chunshi took the opportunity to look at the few villas next to him and found that none of them had the same layout as Wang Shiwu's house. This meant that the heart-piercing fiend pattern was deliberately set up by Wang Shiwu. Thinking of this, Chunshi couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He was truly puzzled. Wang Shiwu was originally such a positive and outstanding young man. How could he fall so easily? Perhaps it was because humans were creatures that were unwilling to be satisfied with their current situation. When money, fame, and power were at their fingertips, they would pursue other things. Just like what countless emperors pursued throughout their lives. Enjoy immortal blessings forever and live as long as the heavens. Chunshi used his true essence to conceal his figure, at the same time shielding himself from all sounds. Just like a ghost, he followed Wang Shiwu into the villa. The doors and windows of the villa were closed, and thick curtains were drawn all around. After Wang Shiwu entered the door, he only turned on the light at the entrance, so this huge villa looked a little gloomy and scary. Wang Shiwu put on his slippers and went straight to the second floor. Because there weren't many furnishings in the room, his footsteps suddenly echoed in this empty room. Tap, tap, tap. The layout of the second floor was similar to the first floor, but there was no kitchen, and there was a study. Wang Shiwu didn't seem to like the light, so he just turned on the aisle light in the corridor. Under the dim light, Wang Shiwu's shadow was very long, and it even looked a little hideous when it was reflected on the wall. He seemed to value his study very much, so he specially installed a fingerprint lock on the door. Wang Shiwu stretched out his finger. With a soft beep, the door of the study opened. Chunshi stood behind Wang Shiwu, quietly watching his every move. Although it was impossible for Wang Shiwu to see through Chunshi's disguise with his cultivation, he seemed to have noticed something, so he couldn't help but look back. On the dim second floor, there was only an empty living room, a dark corridor, and a few bedrooms with their doors tightly shut. There was nothing strange. Wang Shiwu frowned and walked to the window. After checking that the doors and windows were closed, he came back to the study. Then, he gently pushed the door open and entered. A cold wind suddenly blew out of the study. At the same time, there was a faint moldy smell in the room. It was similar to the smell when clothes were not dried in winter and were directly put into the wardrobe and opened in spring. It wasn't smelly, but it still made people feel a little uncomfortable. Wang Shiwu walked into the study, but he still didn't turn on the light, but walked to the bookshelf in the dark. Just like in a treasure hunting movie, Wang Shiwu actually set up a mechanism behind the bookshelf. He pressed the mechanism, and the bookshelf slowly opened like a curtain, revealing the hidden dark room behind it. This was a room about 20 to 30 square meters. In addition to the side where the bookshelf was located, there were shelves similar to bookshelves on the three walls of the dark room. However, there were not books on the shelves, but transparent glass jars one after another. These jars were the same as the jars used to soak white wine in restaurants, but what was soaked in them was not wine, but a newly formed fetus. Seeing such a strange and terrifying scene, Wang Shiwu's face didn't change at all, as if he was used to it. After walking into the dark room, he sat straight on the futon in the center of the dark room. Then, Wang Shiwu closed his eyes and prepared to start tonight's cultivation. Chunshi stood silently behind Wang Shiwu. Even facing the light, there was still no shadow behind him. It was like a ghost, and it was a ghost that came to claim his life in the night of the seventh reincarnation. She didn't know why he was so angry. After all, with his temperament, even if the sky fell, he shouldn't panic at all. But now, Chunshi was infuriated by the arrangement in front of her. If he was still immortal, his temples would probably be throbbing crazily at this moment. In addition to anger, there was more anger. It was too hateful. What was a fetus? To put it simply, it was a child that had already developed but had not yet been born from the mother's belly. The fetus had not yet been born, so naturally it was not contaminated with the turbid air of the world, so it could also be regarded as the purest vitality condensed from the essence of the mother's body. Why would Wang Shiwu choose such an evil place that didn't even have the spiritual energy of heaven and earth as his cultivation place? Wasn't it because he didn't need to work hard to refine the spiritual energy of heaven and earth into vital essence? As long as he used this evil and bizarre technique, he would be able to extract the energy from one fetus after another. Just like pouring tea, he would be able to pour the energy directly into his dantian, thus saving him the time needed to refine the natural energy of heaven and earth. Chapter 302. In the dark room. The glass jars were neatly arranged on the shelves, one after another, and there were at least 70 to 80 of them. In other words, at least 70 to 80 little lives had been ruthlessly taken away before they could even let out their first cry. Although the yuan qi in the fetus was pure, how old was the child? How much primordial qi could a young body contain? Therefore, although there were only 70 to 80 glass jars in the dark room, the number of innocent victims was definitely more than that. God knows how many lively and lovely children this bastard had killed. This set of evil cultivation method was actually somewhat similar to Sun Wen's 5 elements soul cultivation technique, but Sun Wen used living people while Wang Shiwu used fetuses. In Chun Shi's view, even if these fetuses were bought by Wang Shiwu with money, it was an absolutely unforgivable sin. But although he was angry, Chun Shi did not immediately act out, but quietly wandered around the room. He wanted to see where Wang Shiwu learned these crooked methods from. Sure enough, after Chun Shi wandered around the room, he found that there was something like a secret manual on the table in front of Wang Shiwu. Walking over to take a look, he saw that there were 4 large words written in traditional script. Corpse Infant Soul Transference. Chun Shi roughly glanced at the contents recorded in the secret manual and found that this set of cultivation method was indeed extremely evil, and even went against any cultivation method he knew of on Earth. Although the content of Wang Shiwu's current cultivation method was very superficial, but Chun Shi roughly deduced according to the core of this set of cultivation method, and found that this set of cultivation method was actually self-contained and was completely feasible in theory. A perfect set of cultivation method that did not require the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, and purely relied on absorbing the yuan qi of others. This also meant that the person who cultivated this set of cultivation method would not be limited by the sparse spiritual qi of earth. As long as there was an endless supply of yuan qi, then he could smoothly break through to the celestial level, condense the golden core, and form the yuanying. Then there was a problem. Just who was the one who created such an extremely evil cultivation method? Since he was able to create such a cultivation method, then regardless of whether this person was good or evil, he could definitely be called a genius. Thinking of this, Chun Shi couldn't help but make a guess. Could it be, was this person also from the heavenly gates? But after thinking about it carefully, Chun Shi felt that this guess didn't seem to be too reliable. After all, he'd already fought Bai Hong's group. Although the cultivation method used by Bai Hong's group was very different from the immortal cultivation method that Chun Shi knew, the core of their cultivation was still qi refining. They still had to cultivate to be able to transform the spiritual energy of heaven and earth into their own use. This was the most traditional and also the most reliable way of cultivation. If they were to be compared to the factions of the characters in wuxia dramas, White Rainbow's group could be called the righteous faction, and the person who created the evil cultivation method must be a big villain. It was impossible for the two to come together. Chun Shi frowned and looked at the contents of the secret book. He then turned to look at Wang Shiwu, who was sitting on the futon and cultivating. At this time, Wang Shiwu seemed to have noticed the strangeness in the room, so he immediately opened his eyes. Chun Shi. The moment he saw Chun Shi's figure, Wang Shiwu's body trembled violently. Obviously, he was shocked by the sudden appearance of Chun Shi. Chun Shi, why are you here? Wang Shiwu stared with his eyes and mouth wide open, looking at Chun Shi with a shocked expression. Probably because he was too shocked, there was even a blank expression on his face. This place was his biggest secret, but now it was unreservedly displayed in front of Chun Shi. How could Wang Shiwu not panic? You followed me? Seeing that Chun Shi didn't speak, a fierce light flashed across Wang Shiwu's face, and the temperament on his body suddenly became somewhat ferocious. Chun Shi stood not far in front of Wang Shiwu, looking at him condescendingly. Wang Shiwu usually wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses and a tailored suit. He looked completely like a refined and successful person. But now, Wang Shiwu suddenly tore off that layer of disguise and completely showed his true side in front of Chen Shi. Chen Shi didn't speak. Wang Shiwu looked around in bewilderment. When he was sure that there was only Chen Shi here, his face suddenly showed a very strange smile. Very well, since you found out, then don't blame me for being ruthless. After that, Wang Shiwu suddenly jumped up from the futon and slammed his palm on Chen Shi's chest. Wang Shiwu's speed was very fast. The moment he made his move, Wang Shiwu's arm suddenly became like the roots of a tree. His blood vessels protruded, and a layer of dark brown spots and wrinkles appeared on his skin. It looked very strange. Wang Shiwu was Fong Lei's fiancé, and Fong Lei was Qin Ruoying's best friend. Logically speaking, he and Chen Shi were actually very close. What a pity. Wang Shiwu rushed at Chen Shi with a ferocious smile. Just as he was about to hit Chen Shi finally made a move. He suddenly raised his right hand, unlike the action of smashing a ball in table tennis. He slammed his palm down heavily. Slap. If Chen Shi's hand was a table tennis racket, then Wang Shiwu's face was obviously a table tennis racket. Wang Shiwu was immediately sent flying with a solid slap on his face. Bang! With a huge muffled sound, Wang Shiwu's body hit the wall heavily, knocking over a lot of glass jars. The glass shards flew in all directions and fell to the ground with a series of pleasant sounds. You, who the hell are you? Wang Shiwu covered his face and struggled to get up from the ground. When he looked at Chen Shi again, his eyes were full of shock and disbelief. With his current cultivation, he was basically equivalent to a warrior in the profound mastery of gang state. Why didn't he have a chance to fight back in front of Chen Shi? It was like a 3-year-old child fighting with an adult. His opponent could easily slap him until he couldn't find his bearings. How is this possible? Wang Shiwu stared at Chen Shi in a daze. This friend, who was eating at the same table with him just now, had become so strange. Tell me, who taught you these things? Chen Shi looked at Wang Shiwu expressionlessly. Under his gaze, Wang Shiwu suddenly felt like he was being pressed down by a mountain, so heavy that he almost couldn't breathe. Wang Shiwu trembled as he tried to resist the pressure, but at this time, Chen Shi suddenly let out a cold snort. Humph! Chen Shi's voice was very soft, but when it reached Wang Shiwu's ears, it was like a thunderclap. It immediately scattered the pneuma that Wang Shiwu secretly gathered, and even made him kneel down powerlessly on the spot. The huge gap between the two sides seemed to wake Wang Shiwu up. Chapter 303. A strange expression appeared on Chen Shi's face as he looked at Wang Shiwu, who was kneeling on the ground and howling in agony. You turn the page faster than you turn hostile. Don't you think your actions are very low? Hearing this, Wang Shiwu could not help but be stunned. He hurriedly raised his head, as if wanting to explain something. However, at this moment, Chen Shi continued, Save you? Then tell me, how should I save you? Chen Shi looked at Wang Shiwu with a cold expression. He really wanted to hear what kind of story he would come up with. Accidentally entered an evil cult organization, and in the end, fell deeper and deeper, unable to escape. Now that he finally repents, I only ask that you give him a chance to turn over a new leaf. Isn't this plot a little too old-fashioned? Chen Shi added scenes for Wang Shiwu in his heart, but Wang Shiwu did not seem to have the consciousness to become an actor. When he heard the sarcasm in Chen Shi's tone, he begged bitterly, With your abilities, your status in the Wu Yin must be quite high, right? Chen Shi, with our relationship, even if you don't give face to the monk, give face to the Buddha, give face to Lei Lei, can you let me go today? I promise that as long as I can escape this disaster, I will repay you many times over in the future. After hearing Wang Shiwu's words, Chen Shi did not know whether to laugh or cry. He originally thought that Wang Shiwu would come up with some story to deceive him, but he did not expect that Wang Shiwu did not realize what he was doing at all. The only reason he was begging for mercy was because he was afraid of being caught by the Wu Yin. From the looks of it, he should have joined of his own accord and not been forced by someone. Since Wang Shiwu was so afraid of the Wu Yin, It meant that the Wu Yin should have started investigating them long ago. It was just that they did not find any evidence, so they did not do anything to them. Thinking of this, Chun Shi nodded lightly, as if agreeing to Wang Shiwu's request. Seeing this, Wang Shiwu could not help but be overjoyed. He struggled to get up from the ground, but no matter how hard he tried, that mountain-like invisible pressure still pressed him firmly to the ground, and he couldn't stand up no matter what. Don't worry. Tell me what's going on first. Who taught you these things? Otherwise, I won't be able to answer to the higher-ups. Seeing that Chun Shi didn't seem to be joking, Wang Shu hesitated for a moment, then clenched his teeth and said, "Fine, I'll talk. It's actually like this." After that, Wang Shu briefly explained the reason why he learned this kind of evil cultivation method. About half a year ago, not long after his engagement with Feng Lei, Wang Shu joined an organization called the Jinli Sect under the recommendation of a friend. The way this organization recruited members was very simple, and that was through one-on-one referrals. The recommended person must be under the age of 40 and have a certain social status. Only after the approval of the church's board of directors can they enter the church. In other words, this was a cult organization that took the high-end route. What was different from ordinary cult organizations was that the Jinli sect didn't show too obvious antisocial nature. After joining the sect, one only needed to pay a considerable fee, and the member would be able to obtain a cultivation method that was known as a supreme secret technique. In fact, it was the simplest set of qi cultivation methods. When this member succeeded in qi cultivation and found that his physical fitness had greatly improved, he would naturally be more convinced of the Jinli sect. After that, if the member still wanted to obtain a higher level of cultivation method, he would need to do something for the Jinli sect in exchange for the approval of the board of directors. Only then could he officially become a believer of the Jinli sect. Of course, only after officially becoming a believer of the Jinli sect could he obtain this set of corpse baby soul crossing, which was known as the cult's secret technique. Wang Shiwu's explanation was very simple. After listening for a while, Chun Shi roughly understood how this cult operated. Wasn't this an upgraded version of pyramid schemes, blockchain? The evil cultivation method was originally a shortcut. It could let people taste the benefits in a short time, so it was naturally very tempting. Thinking of this, Chun Shi couldn't help but ask curiously, "You're a believer, right? Then what did you do for the Jinli sect back then?" Hearing this, an obvious unnatural expression flashed across Wang Shiwu's face, but soon he pretended to be casual and said, "I paid 20 million as a membership fee and recommended 3 friends to join the sect. Then I can become a believer." After saying that, Wang Shiwu raised his head and looked at Chun Shi. After seeing that Chun Shi's eyes were still very cold, Wang Shiwu quickly lowered his head again. It was obvious that he was lying. However, Chun Shi didn't seem to have the intention to delve deeper. Instead, he changed the question and asked, "Where is the headquarters of the Jinli sect?" "I don't know about this. The church has a one-to-one referral system. I usually meet the referral at the club we often go to, so I don't have to go to the headquarters. Don't you need the approval of the steward to become a believer?" "Who's the steward?" "I don't know." Wang Shu shook his head and continued, "I haven't seen the steward with my own eyes. We usually have a video call, and I have to wear a mask when I talk." After saying that, Wang Shu pointed to the golden mask on the table. This time, Wang Shu wasn't lying. He really hadn't seen the steward, and he really didn't know where the headquarters of the Jinli sect was. Chun Shi frowned and pondered for a while. When he was about to continue asking, Chun Shi suddenly frowned, because the restriction on Lin Xian's body was triggered. When he left just now, Chun Shi quietly placed a restriction on Lin Xian's body. Now that the restriction was triggered, it meant that someone was trying to get close to Lin Xian. As expected, after only a few seconds, Chun Shi noticed that the self-defense pendant he gave Lin Xian had been activated. Someone was trying to hurt her. When he noticed all this, Chun Shi's figure disappeared from Wang Shiwu's sight almost instantly. Wang Shiwu stared blankly at the spot where Chun Shi was just now. After a long while, he struggled to stand up, but it was still in vain. He could only helplessly shout in the dark room, Chun-Shi? Chun-Shi? Where did you go? Let me go first. Of course, Chun-Shi didn't have time to deal with Wang Shiwu now. When Li Xiaowen was eating just now, there was an evil aura around him. Before he left, he took a deep look at Lin Xian. Therefore, Chun-Shi was very vigilant and placed a restriction on Lin Xian. Destroy what you can't get. He didn't expect Li Xiaowen to take this step after all. Chun-Shi quickly rushed to Lin Xian's location, only to find that Lin Xian had been moving and at a very fast speed. Could it be she's already been abducted? Thinking of this, Chun-Shi couldn't help but change his expression slightly. There were a total of 3 pieces of the self-defense pen that he made. One was on Aunt Zhang, one was on Yin Yin, and the last one was on Lin Xian. No matter what, it was a magic tool that he made personally. Although the materials were crude, it shouldn't be damaged so quickly, right? Chapter 304. Rewind time to half an hour ago. After Lin Xian left in a taxi, Li Xiaowen, who had left early, suddenly appeared out of nowhere and followed Lin Xian all the way back to her neighborhood. However, Li Xiaowen did not follow Lin Xian into the neighborhood. Instead, he called Lin Xian from outside the neighborhood, implying that he wanted to talk to her face to face. He had pursued Lin Xian for many years, and this time, he seemed to have finally thought it through. So he wanted to meet with Lin Xian one last time. They could chat as friends, and it could be considered as a farewell. From then on, he would not disturb her anymore. After hearing Li Xiaowen's heartfelt confession, Lin Xian was silent on the other end of the phone. She held her phone in one hand and pulled open the curtains with the other. In the hazy city at night, the flashing neon lights could not illuminate the deepest corner of her heart. At this moment, the scene was similar to what Huang Jingren described in Qi Huai, sitting under the flowers and playing the flute, gazing into the distance through the red walls. As if this star was not last night, for whom the wind and dew stood in the middle of the night. Lingering thoughts are exhausted, turning the heartache and peeling the banana. 3 to 5 years, 3 to 5 months. The pitiful cup of wine has not disappeared. The pitiful cup of wine has not disappeared. The bitterness of the world is no greater than the bitterness of infatuation. It had to be said that this kind of infatuated man's image could easily soften a woman's heart. Therefore, after much consideration, Lin Xian agreed to his request. She then went downstairs to Li Xiaowen's car to have a good talk with him. In reality, the reason why Lin Xian usually gave Li Xiaowen the cold shoulder was not because she really disliked Li Xiaowen, but because she did not want Li Xiaowen to waste too much time on her. Lin Xian was a rational woman, but at the same time, she was a kind woman. Because of this, she never gave Li Xiaowen a good look. She only hoped that he would back off in the face of difficulties and not take any chances. After all, after so many years, even if you raised a dog, you would still have some feelings for it. Moreover, was that still a human? But it was a pity Lin Xian's heart already belonged to someone, and her attitude towards relationships was very extreme. She would never allow herself to compromise. As the saying goes, when one's heart is moved, it means that one is heartless. Lin Xian reluctantly got into the car. One had to know that ever since Li Xiaowen officially started pursuing her, Lin Xian had never sat in Li Xiaowen's car again. Therefore, when she sat in Li Xiaowen's car, she clearly felt uncomfortable. Lin Xian felt awkward, but Li Xiaowen was very excited. Perhaps he was afraid of scaring Lin Xian, so Li Xiaowen suppressed his voice and said to Lin Xian in a slightly restrained manner, Xian, it's not like you don't know my feelings for you. Before he finished, Li Xian interrupted. His resolute tone and the emotionless directly completely widened the gap between the two of them. Lin Xian's attitude was so bad that it seemed to be out of Li Xiaowen's expectations. He was stunned. At this moment, he no longer had the attitude of a rich second-generation heir or a big boss of a corporation. He was just a sad loser. Seeing Li Xiaowen at a loss, Lin Xian's heart softened. Therefore, after a soft sigh, Lin Xian said gently, I'm sorry, I really don't have any feelings for you, so I have to express my attitude clearly, in case you misunderstand. I hope you can understand. Li Xiaowen was silent. The car suddenly became quiet. After a while, he asked in a heavy tone, "Then are we still friends?" Hearing this, Lin Xian hesitated for a moment, then said helplessly, "It better not be." Then, Lin Xian was ready to open the door and get out of the car. She and Li Xiaowen were not considered friends. This time, she made it clear so that he would completely give up. To be honest, Lin Xian did not want to hurt others like this, but when it came to relationships, it would be messy. It was better to be less conflicted and more decisive. While thinking, Lin Xian pulled the car door, but realized that the door was locked. Therefore, she said to Li Xiaowen, "Please open the door. I should go back." However, Li Xiaowen did not seem to hear her. He held the steering wheel with both hands and lowered his head. She did not know what he was thinking. Seeing this, Lin Xian suddenly felt a little scared, so she said again, "Hey, it's late. I have to go to work tomorrow. Please open the door. I should go back." After saying that, Lin Xian tried to push the car door again, but she couldn't push it open. This car was probably modified, so once it was locked, only the driver could unlock it. Lin Xian had no choice but to turn around and try to persuade Li Xiaowen to open the door. But just as she turned around, Li Xiaowen suddenly started the car. Stepping on the accelerator, the car suddenly rushed out like a horse that had lost control. The huge inertia caused Lin Xian to fall heavily on the back of the seat. After regaining her senses, Lin Xian shouted in panic, "Stop the car! Stop the car! I want to get out! I'm calling the police!" As she shouted, Lin Xian took out her phone to call the police. Seeing this, Li Xiaowen suddenly swung the steering wheel, and the car suddenly drifted on the road. This also caused Lin Xian to lose her balance, and the phone in her hand flew out. Lin Xian was completely flustered. She could only hit Li Xiaowen's shoulder and screamed, "Stop the car! Let me out!" "Shut up!" Li Xiaowen glared fiercely at Lin Xian and then sped up again. Accompanied by the loud sound of the engine, the car suddenly rushed out at an extremely fast speed. Lin Xian was frightened by Li Xiaowen's behavior. Out of consideration for her own safety, she did not dare to do anything that might anger him. She could only curl up in the front passenger seat and hold on tightly to the seatbelt. Her careful look made her look especially helpless. Li Xiaowen brought Lin Xian and sped through the city. Not long after, he brought Lin Xian to a church-like building. Then, Li Xiaowen violently pulled Lin Xian out of the car and then dragged her straight to the church. "What are you doing? Let me go." Lin Xian struggled with all her might, but she was a woman who did not weigh more than 100 pounds. How could she win against a young and strong man? Moreover, Li Xiaowen's strength seemed to be exceptionally great. Using only one hand, he was able to easily drag her into the church as if she was a chicken. "Xian, did you know? I once swore." Chapter 305. "Let me go! Let me go! Save me! Help! Save me!" Lin Xian screamed as she used her nails to scratch at Li Xiaowen's arm. However, Li Xiaowen's arm was like a steel plate, and no matter how hard Lin Xian tried, it was futile. At the same time, because she used too much strength, she broke a lot of her carefully trimmed nails, and her fingertips started to bleed. Lin Xian's screams were very loud, but Li Xiaowen did not care and dragged her like a sack towards the church. The church's door was not locked, and Li Xiaowen gave it a push, and the door slowly opened. Then, he dragged Lin Xian into the church. But the strange thing was, it was night time, but the church that should have been closed a long time ago was brightly lit. The lights shone on the colorful window decorations on both sides, silently giving off a solemn and dignified feeling. Then, this solemn atmosphere was broken by Lin Xian's screams. There was no one in the large hall, and Li Xiaowen dragged Lin Xian on the red carpet in the middle, and the commotion they made seemed to have alerted the church staff. Following a series of light footsteps, a figure walked out from the depths of the church. That person was about 40 or 50 years old, dressed as a priest, and had a cross pendant around his neck. He looked like the priest in charge of this church. Lin Xian made a lot of noise, but the priest acted as if he did not hear it. After he appeared from the passage, he went straight to the altar in the middle of the church, and then calmly looked at the pair of young people in front of him. Li Xiaowen dragged Lin Xian to the altar and finally let go of Lin Xian's arm. Perhaps because she struggled too hard, Lin Xian was now completely exhausted, and so she laid on the carpet on the spot. At this moment, Li Xiaowen lowered his head slightly and said respectfully to the priest standing behind the altar, "Steward Sun, I want this woman to fall in love with me wholeheartedly and never leave me for the rest of her life. Sorry to trouble you." Hearing this, the priest who was addressed as Steward Sun took a deep look at Li Xiaowen, then asked calmly, "Just for a woman? Do you know what price you have to pay? You only have one chance. You'd better think carefully before answering me." After hearing Steward Sun's words, Li Xiaowen hesitated for a moment. But when he looked at Lin Xian, who was lying beside him, he fiercely gritted his teeth and solemnly nodded in response. "I know. I have no regrets. Manager Sun, sorry to trouble you." "Very good. The Heavenly Father has heard your words. Now it is time for you to listen to the gospel." The priest nodded. Then he raised his right hand and pointed his index finger at Lin Xian. At this moment, Lin Xian was like an injured rabbit. She could only kneel on the ground weakly. She tried her best to distance herself from Li Xiaowen, but at this moment, an invisible force suddenly surrounded her. Feeling the strange feeling in her body, Lin Xian could not help but cry out in surprise. She wanted to struggle, but the invisible force tightened around her. It was like a cloth wrapped around a mummy. Layer after layer, it wrapped around her until she could not move. Just as Lin Xian was about to be crushed by this force until she could not breathe, the pendant in front of her chest suddenly exploded with an extremely dazzling light. Seeing this, Steward Sun could not help but look at her in astonishment. He softly muttered, "A magical weapon? Like an eggshell, the light that exploded from the pendant instantly enveloped Lin Xian." Steward Sun carefully looked at the cover that was formed by the light. Suddenly, a look of disdain appeared on his face. A crude piece of work. As soon as he finished speaking, Steward Sun suddenly clenched his right hand tightly. An enormous force instantly surged from all directions and crazily squeezed the light cover. In just a few breaths' time, the inferior Guanyin statue that cost Shi 100 yuan was instantly shattered like glass. It was turned into fine powder by this force. With the protective magical weapon losing its effect, Lin Xian instantly became a fish on the chopping board. She could only wait to be slaughtered. Then, Steward Sun waved his right hand. Lin Xian's body slowly flew up and landed on the altar in front of him. Lin Xian lay on the altar, unable to move. As she was too scared, she had long turned pale with fright and tears streamed down her face. "Help! Who can save me?" Lin Xian tried her best to cry for help, but her throat seemed to be blocked by something. She could only let out a desperate whimper. At this moment, Steward Sun looked at Li Xiaowen again. He then handed a golden dagger to him. "Come here and drip your blood into the holy water pool. Then let this woman drink the holy water. From today onwards, everything about her belongs to you, including her soul." Hearing this, Li Xiaowen immediately took the dagger. Then he followed Steward Sun's instructions and walked to the side of the holy water pool. He used the dagger to lightly cut his fingertip. When the sharp dagger cut his skin, Li Xiaowen instantly felt a piercing pain. The pain seemed to come from the depths of his soul. He could not help but let out a blood-curdling scream. However, despite the pain, Li Xiaowen did not forget Steward Sun's instructions. He hurriedly extended his finger above the holy water pool. A drop of dark red blood slid from his fingertip and fell directly into the pool below. Then, Li Xiaowen picked up the Holy Grail from the table beside him. He used the Holy Grail to scoop a cup of holy water mixed with his blood into the pool. Then he turned around and walked to Lin Xian. Although Lin Xian could not move, she heard their conversation clearly. So when she saw Li Xiaowen walking to her side with the cup, Lin Xian instantly let out a series of emotional sobs. Bean-sized teardrops kept falling from the corners of her eyes. In a daze, she remembered that day again, that dilapidated building that leaked air everywhere, that figure that suddenly appeared, I don't know why. This time, Lin Xian really hoped that Chun-Shi could come in time. Therefore, even if she could not make any sound, she was crazily screaming in her heart, "Chun-Shi, save me." Perhaps it was because the Jesus statue on the altar heard her prayer. So, just as Li Xiaowen was about to feed her the holy water with the Holy Grail, the door of the church was suddenly pushed open. It was not right to say that it was pushed open because the two doors were directly sent flying. It was as if they were hit by an ancient battering ram. The two 3-meter-tall heavy doors were knocked off their frames and flew directly into the church. Then, they crashed into rows of seats. Chapter 306. Just as the church's door was blown away, Manager Sun frowned deeply. He actually did not notice that someone was approaching the church. How was this possible? It was obvious that the person was not an ordinary person. Out of the intention to test him, Manager Sun took a deep look at the person and said in a deep voice, "Do you know, where is this place?" Although he spoke softly, his voice was exceptionally loud and clear. It was as if the sound had been amplified by a high-powered surround sound system. When Steward Sun's voice reached the entrance of the church, the decibels grew louder and louder. It was like a thunderclap, instantly shattering the windows on both sides of the wall. A simple sentence, but sounded like the legendary lion's roar technique. But what made Manager Sun feel strange was that although his voice was so loud, the person did not show any expression on his face. Instead, he calmly continued to walk towards the altar. Like a devout believer who came to the church every week, that person stepped on the red carpet and walked over, as if he did not care about Manager Sun at all. At this moment, Li Xiaowen, who was standing next to Lin Xian with the Holy Grail, also placed his attention on this strange intruder. But when he saw the person's face clearly, he could not help but exclaim, "Chun-Shi, that's right. This intruder who broke the church's door, wasn't that the Chun-Shi who had dinner with him just now?" After hearing Li Xiaowen's voice, Chun-Shi finally stopped and stood about 5 meters away from the altar. He looked at Li Xiaowen with a meaningful gaze, then slowly said, "We are all friends. We could have had a good meal together. But why did you have to court death?" He said, "You all, not you so." While these words were said to Li Xiaowen, they were also said to Wang Shiwu, who was far away. Chun-Shi's words had a deep meaning, but Li Xiaowen did not understand at all, so he immediately asked, "What are you doing here?" Hearing this, Chun-Shi laughed as if he heard a joke. "What do you think?" Li Xiaowen stopped talking. After taking a deep look at Chun-Shi, he shifted his gaze to the empty door of the church. Obviously, Li Xiaowen also realized that Chun-Shi was not a normal person. Hence, Li Xiaowen immediately said to Steward Sun beside him, "Steward Sun, I did not bring this person here. He and I." However, before Li Xiaowen could finish his sentence, Steward Sun suddenly raised his arm and interrupted him. After that, Steward Sun walked out from behind the altar. He stood on the stairs and looked down at Chun-Shi. He asked coldly, "Do you know where this is?" "Where?" After hearing Manager Sun's question, Chun-Shi smiled disdainfully and replied, "Look at your serious face. Is this some dragon's lair or tiger's den?" At this point, Chun-Shi deliberately paused and then asked with a smile, "If you didn't say it, I would have thought that this is a garbage collection center and all kinds of garbage are stuffed in here. How dare you?" Seeing Chun-Shi's nonchalant expression, Steward Sun could not help but be furious. He scolded sternly, "Ignorant child, is my universal truth sect a place for you to be presumptuous?" After saying that, Steward Sun suddenly raised his right hand, and a ball of flame suddenly jumped out of his palm. After that, without seeing any action from Steward Sun, the ball of flame suddenly burned fiercely and then turned into countless lifelike flame crows. They flapped their wings crazily and pounced toward Chun-Shi from all directions. Seeing this, a cold smile suddenly appeared on the corner of Chun-Shi's mouth. With a wave of his hand, an invisible force suddenly blew away all the fire crows like a hurricane. After seeing Chun-Shi's move, Steward Sun's expression changed slightly. He frowned and said, "Celestial, why? Are you scared?" Chun-Shi looked at Steward Sun with a mocking gaze. After that, he raised his index finger and said slowly, "I'll give you another chance to attack. Cherish it. I hope you can show me something different." Hearing this, Steward Sun could not help but fly into a rage. How dare a mere celestial speak so arrogantly? If that's the case, then I'll show you today. What is a god? As soon as he finished speaking, the black robe on Steward Sun's body suddenly fluttered, and a gloomy and cold aura immediately spread in the main hall. As Li Xiaowen was too close to Steward Sun, he instantly felt as if he had fallen into a 10,000-year-old ice cave. It was so cold that he almost could not breathe. Chun-Shi looked at Steward Sun silently. He sensed that there was a surge of power in Steward Sun's body, and this power was being released bit by bit. If there was no accident, then it should be the primordial core that he condensed by using the evil technique. Primordial core, golden core. There's only a difference of one word, but the meaning was completely different. The so-called golden core was the condensation of all the true essence in an immortal cultivator's entire body to a point. After that, it would undergo repeated compression and tempering. Like refining pills, the impurities would be removed and the essence would be extracted. Finally, it would be formed into a ball and stored in the dantian. It sounded very simple, but condensing a golden core was not an easy task. It was like rolling a piece of foil into a small ball. It was very easy. However, after rolling into a ball, it had to be hammered bit by bit until it was solid. Only after being hammered thousands of times could this piece of foil be turned into a complete and flawless metal ball. And if the number of hammering was not enough, even if this piece of foil had been molded into a small metal ball, there would still be many flaws in it. This was because its structure was not complete, and it was only a superficial appearance. Just as the old saying goes, a 1,000-mile dike would collapse because of an ant's nest. As long as the flaw of the small ball was found, it would naturally be easy to shatter and disintegrate the small ball. Therefore, this kind of flawed golden core was also called the primordial core. Logically speaking, since an immortal cultivator had already formed the primordial core, it was only a matter of time before they condensed it into a golden core. However, because Steward Sun cultivated an evil technique that relied on absorbing the essence of other people's souls to nourish himself, and this technique itself was not a top-notch technique, in the long run, the impurities in his body would far exceed that of an ordinary immortal cultivator. Therefore, when he was refining his golden core, he would naturally spend more time than others. However, even if Steward Sun had not truly condensed his golden core, he was still the first existence that Chun-Shi had met on Earth that surpassed the celestial being level. At the same time, he was also the first existence that dared to call himself a god in front of Chun-Shi. It was really... Chapter 307. Although Steward Sun was dressed as a priest, an extremely evil aura suddenly surged out of his body in his rage. And this was obviously his true face. This Jinli sect that used religious beliefs to recruit members was actually more like the heretical demons that often appeared in wuxia dramas. As long as it was beneficial to them, they would do anything and everything. Therefore, when Steward Sun opened his arms and let out a long howl, his body suddenly emitted a lot of black fog, which looked very strange. After the black fog appeared from Steward Sun's body, it kept changing its shape. It was like thousands of ferocious human faces that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws as they hovered in midair. What was even more frightening was that these human faces seemed to be alive as they kept letting out ear-piercing screams. In an instant, the originally solemn and sacred church had turned into an incomparably evil place of ghosts. The temperature in the air suddenly dropped, and a gloomy and cold feeling enveloped everyone present. Ghost! Ghost! Perhaps it was because he had not been in the sect for long and had not come into contact with too many core secrets. Even Li Xiaowen was so frightened that he could not help but take a few steps back when he saw such a terrifying scene. In reality, weren't these ghostly shadows floating in the air the innocent lives that Steward Sun had harmed all these years because of his cultivation of evil techniques? Not only did he harm people's lives and steal their souls, but he also bound the souls of innocent people in his body as a means of attack. He did not even let the dead off. This kind of heinous and inhumane cruel behavior was probably only done by an evil cultivator. You're celestial, right? It just so happens that my 1,000 ghost-devouring soul still lacks a ghost king. I'll leave this position to you. After a violent howl, Steward Sun's body shook violently. Immediately after, the thousands of ghostly shadows were like dark clouds that covered the sun as they suddenly pressed down on Qinshi. Sunluo, Purgatory, 100 Ghosts Parade. Demons and monsters, 1,000 ghosts devouring soul. Faced with such a terrifying scene, Qinshi's mind suddenly thought of something else. When he had just met Ning Zhonghua had asked him to treat his old friend, Zhang Jiada. Didn't Zhang Jiada's youngest son, Zhang Hanyuan, specially cultivate an evil technique to torture his father? This evil technique wasn't of the same origin as the evil technique that Steward Sun was using now. As it turned out, the Jinli sect had started to recruit believers long ago, but they were not as unscrupulous as they were now. The shadow was about to arrive, but Chunshi was still thinking about some unimportant questions, as if he did not take Steward Sun seriously at all. Manager Sun couldn't help but laugh coldly when he saw this. And then he crossed his arms and prepared to admire Chun-Shi's painful appearance when a myriad of ghosts devoured his heart. However, when these Yin spirits rushed in front of Chun-Shi, they were like vampires that had suddenly seen sunlight, suddenly letting out a sharp and ear-piercing howl. Immediately after, these ghosts were like the shadows before dawn, disappearing the moment they saw the sunlight. This soul-devouring 10,000 ghosts has lost its effect. Steward Sun's eyes widened as if he couldn't believe what was happening before his eyes. From the beginning to the end, Chun-Shi stood on the spot without moving. He didn't even lift his eyelids. However, the thousands of Yin spirits that he had painstakingly collected all these years melted like snow, and almost all of them disappeared in an instant, leaving only a few scattered souls hovering above the dome of the church. There wasn't even a splash, and everything returned to normal. What exactly happened? Steward Sun's mind was blank, and he was really stunned by what was happening before his eyes. Boring. Seeing Steward Sun's puzzled look, Chun-Shi couldn't help but shake his head slightly, and then he slowly walked toward the altar. The soul-devouring 10,000 ghosts was a soul attack, so it wasn't as gorgeous as ordinary spells, but its lethality wasn't inferior to sword techniques, spells, and so on. However, it was a pity that there was a huge limitation to divine spirit attacks, and that was level suppression. Unless Steward Sun's realm exceeded or was equal to Chun-Shi's, he would never be able to hurt Chun-Shi with a soul attack. Ants biting an elephant to death. It was obviously impossible. You have a realm, but you don't have the strength to match it. Do you know, you don't even have the right to make me draw my sword. As he spoke, Chun-Shi stretched out his index and middle fingers, and then he formed a sword with his fingers and pointed in the air. A green sword gleam suddenly shot out, and it instantly hit Steward Sun's chest. Steward Sun stared at his chest in a daze, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. Chun-Shi originally wanted to test Steward Sun's cultivation, but he didn't expect him to be so weak. In terms of combat power, he reckoned that he was no match for Sun Wen. After all, Sun Wen's cultivation was accumulated through his own cultivation, bit by bit. How could it be compared to Steward Sun's unorthodox cultivation? Steward Sun was seriously injured, and the restriction that restrained Lin Xian immediately lost its effect. Therefore, after letting out a cry of surprise, Lin Xian suddenly sat up from the altar and threw herself directly into Chun-Shi's arms. Chun-Shi. Lin Xian lay on the altar. Although she couldn't move, she was conscious, so she saw everything that happened. She always felt that Chun-Shi wasn't an ordinary person, and this time, it was confirmed. However, this reality was far beyond her imagination. Lin Xian cried loudly in Chun-Shi's arms. That weeping pear blossom looked like a child who had been wronged outside and would only cry in front of her parents when she returned home. However, after crying for a while, Lin Xian lay in Chun Shi's arms and murmured softly, Chun Shi, Chun Shi, Chun Shi. Hearing her mutter his name, Chun Shi could only smile awkwardly. He then gently pushed her away and comforted her softly. It's okay. I'm here. Don't be afraid. After Chun Shi pushed Lin Xian away, she seemed to have sobered up a lot. Therefore, after looking deeply at Chun Shi with her red eyes, she quickly lowered her head and said softly with a sobbing tone, Thank you. You saved me again. The atmosphere between the two of them was rather ambiguous, and they simply treated Li Xiaowen and Steward Sun as if they didn't exist. Chun Shi didn't kill Steward Sun directly because he wanted to keep him alive and use this opportunity to understand the Zhenli sect. However, Chun Shi didn't expect that. Even though Steward Sun was seriously injured, a fierce look flashed across his face before he collapsed. While Lin Xian was talking to Chun Shi, Steward Sun mustered all his strength, took off the cross on his neck, and threw it at the statue of Jesus. The moment the bloody cross hit the statue of Jesus, a strong ray of light suddenly bloomed in the church. Something unexpected happened. Chun Shi couldn't care so much anymore. He could only pull Lin Xian into his arms. Following that, he hugged Lin Xian with his left hand and made a grabbing motion in the air with his right hand. The godly sword dharma power suddenly appeared in his hand. The reason why he was so vigilant was because there was suddenly a strong wave of true yuan in the church. The strength of the movement. Chapter 308. Holy light bloomed and the gospel was sung. A dazzling door of light that was like a lake appeared out of thin air right in front of the statue of Jesus. The door of light emitted tens of thousands of golden rays. Looking from afar, it looked like sunlight reflected in the water. After the sunlight was refracted by the lake, it began to jump gently along with the ripples on the lake's surface, causing countless golden spots of different sizes to appear on the church's walls and dome. Looking from afar, it was as if countless little elves were dancing on the church's dome. If a devout Christian saw this scene, he would probably be so scared that he would kneel on the ground on the spot and shout that Christ had shown his holiness. Unfortunately, Li Xiaowen and Manager Sun did not believe in Christianity, but in the very mysterious Church of Truth. As the door of light opened, a huge amount of true essence leaked out from the door of light. The so-called leakage originally referred to chemical substances that should not have flowed out or leaked out of the mechanical equipment without anyone noticing, thus causing unnecessary losses. But now, what was leaking out from the door of light was not some chemical substance, but the true essence that was painstakingly refined by immortal cultivators. True essence was obtained by immortal cultivators through cultivation bit by bit, so theoretically speaking, it was impossible for it to leak. It was also because of this that once the true essence leaked out, there was basically only one reason, and that was when immortal cultivators accidentally went berserk during cultivation, they would no longer be able to control the true essence in their body as they wished. For such a situation, there was a word that could vividly describe it, and that was incontinence. Chun Shi shielded Lin Xian behind him, then carefully observed the movement in the door of light. Ever since the door of light appeared, an extremely fanatical expression appeared on Manager Sun's face. He was clearly seriously injured, but now he was as if nothing had happened. He knelt on the ground with a flushed face, raised his hands, and shouted loudly, Father, show your holiness. Have mercy on us. Purify everything in this world that dares to disobey you. As soon as he finished this strange prayer, Manager Sun's face suddenly flushed red. He looked extremely like a religious fanatic who was drunk. However, just as Manager Sun was extremely excited, a red light suddenly shot out from the door of light, directly hitting Manager Sun's glabella. Then, as if he had been electrocuted, his whole body began to tremble violently, and he couldn't help but let out a painful howl. It hurts! The wailing stopped abruptly. After that, Steward Sun's appearance aged at a speed visible to the naked eye. His head of black hair looked as if it had been painted with spray paint, turning snow white in an instant. In the blink of an eye, Steward Sun had turned into an old man with a head full of white hair and a withered face. This what's going on? What did I do? Steward Sun's voice was hoarse as he stared at his arm, dumbfounded. His arm, like an eggplant that had lost its moisture, it was full of wrinkles and shriveled, looking particularly horrifying. Perhaps it was because he was unable to accept everything before his eyes. Steward Sun once again let out a mournful wail. But this wail didn't last long. It was as if Steward Sun's neck was suddenly choked by someone. He instantly lost his voice and could only lie paralyzed on the ground, twitching weakly. But after twitching a few times, Steward Sun lay on the ground, completely dead. This looking at the dehydrated corpse in front of him, Li Xiaowen was stunned. But when he finally came back to his senses, put down the Holy Grail, and was about to escape this godforsaken place, a black shadow suddenly appeared in the light door. It was a person whose entire body was shrouded in a black cloak. That person only revealed half of his face. But just based on this half of his face, it was enough to tell that he should be an old man. The old man walked out of the light door, then asked such a question in a hoarse voice. Who? Alarmed me. After saying that, he slowly removed the cloak, revealing his true appearance. This was an old man whose eyebrows were stained with silver frost. His weather-beaten face was engraved with the traces of time. Although his pair of brown eyes were deep in his eye sockets, the gaze in them was very calm. He looked exceptionally kind and amiable, just like the old grandpa next door who lay in the district's garden and basked in the sun every day. The old man calmly asked a question, but no one answered him. After all, the only person who knew who he was, Steward Sun, was now lying on the ground as a dried corpse. In reality, the light door was a teleportation array. The key to activate the array was the cross hanging in front of Steward Sun's chest, but the energy required to activate the array required all of his essence and blood. Steward Sun activated the array excitedly. But what he definitely didn't expect was that when the array was activated, it would take his life, and even his soul was not spared. His soul was destroyed. Death wasn't scary. What was scary was not even knowing how one died. After taking a deep look at the light door, Chunshi couldn't help but feel sad for Steward Sun. Such a loyal subordinate was abandoned just like that. Just from this point alone, the old man in front of him was really a qualified evil cultivator. Chunshi held the divine Sword Dharma idol in his hand and kept sizing up the old man in front of him. Lin Xian, on the other hand, carefully hid behind him. Because her line of sight was blocked by the altar, she didn't know that Steward Sun was now a dried corpse. So, after hearing the old man's voice, Lin Xian curiously poked her head out and quietly sized him up. The old man was also sizing up Chunshi. When he saw the divine sword Dharma idol in Chun-Shi's hand, a glimmer of light flashed in his deep eye sockets. Then he set his gaze on Lin Xian. Lin Xian didn't understand the situation, so she tilted her head and looked at the old man in front of her blankly. However, just this one look, it was as if some mechanism had been triggered, causing the old man to suddenly explode. Like a venomous snake that had been hibernating for a long time, he directly pounced in the direction of his prey. Before Lin Xian could react, the old man had already rushed in front of her. Because the distance was too close, Lin Xian could even clearly see the color spots on the old man's face, so she was so frightened that she couldn't help but cry out. Seeing this, the old man couldn't help but laugh out loud. I didn't expect that I would actually find such a high-quality furnace here today. Little girl, you're in luck. After saying that, the old man stretched out his withered arm, wanting to directly pull Lin Xian out from behind Chunshi. However, just as he stretched out his arm, a cold voice suddenly rang in his ears. Get lost. As soon as the voice fell. Chapter 309. A cold light flashed. The old man suddenly attacked, but Chunshi's reaction was not slow in the slightest. This sword was like a silver hook. After drawing a beautiful arc in the air, it directly cut the old man's arm. The tip of the sword entered the flesh, and suddenly there was a tearing sound. Immediately after, the old man's arm fell from his body very smoothly, as if it had been cut by a laser. Lin Xian was stunned by what happened in front of her eyes. She hid behind Chun Shi, maintaining her previous posture. After seeing the long sword in Chun Shi's hand cut the old man's arm, her mind suddenly went blank. She could not help but open her small mouth, her face full of shock. That dazed look, it gave people a silly and cute feeling. Lin Xian was so frightened that she could not speak. Her eyes were fixed on the severed arm falling from the air. However, the moment the severed arm fell to the ground, it suddenly turned into a cloud of black smoke and dissipated. It looked like a piece of dried straw paper that had been burned to ashes. When the wind blew, it immediately disappeared without a trace. Chun Shi, this. Lin Xian's eyes widened. Before she could finish her words, she found that her body was flying back uncontrollably. Stay there, don't move. After using his essential essence to send Lin Xian to a safe place, Chun Shi did not forget to remind her. Then, holding the long sword in his hand, he directly attacked the old man. Lin Xian was just an ordinary person, so the scene she saw was completely different from what Chun Shi saw. In fact, in Chun Shi's eyes, the old man's skin hidden under the cloak had already fallen off. Most of his muscles had also rotted away, revealing sections of white bones. What kind of person was this? It was simply an old, rotten corpse that had crawled out of the grave. If it was just a skeleton, it would be fine. After all, Chun Shi had lived for 500 years and had seen all kinds of strange things. Naturally, he would not take a living dead person to heart. The reason why he was so cautious was mainly because the skeleton in front of him was not simple. From the moment the old man walked out of the light door, Chun Shi sensed a huge amount of essential essence leaking from the old man's body. But a little strange was, although the amount of essential essence was huge, it gave people a turbid and filthy feeling. If Chun Shi's essential essence was as clear as a lake, then the old man's essential essence was like oil on one side and turbid on the other. It was really strange. And because of the essential essence leaking from the old man's body, in Chun Shi's eyes, the old man was more like a charcoal that walked out of fire, his whole body emitting thick, billowing smoke. Not long after, the black smoke emitted from the old man's body filled the entire church. In addition, during the confrontation with the old man, Chun Shi also focused on the light door behind him. This light door was somewhat similar to the heavenly gate, but it could not be compared to the heavenly gate. After all, the heavenly gate required the support of a huge amount of spiritual energy to open, but this light door in front of him only needed Manager's son, a pseudo-core stage living sacrifice. If it was another world behind the heavenly gate, then behind the light door was obviously just an illegally expanded basement. There was a fundamental difference between the two. And this kind of illegally built basement was actually a small world or a small paradise that was opened up in the void after immortal cultivators comprehended the true meaning of the word void. What was void? This was a very abstract concept. Chun Shi was still at the soul formation stage, so naturally, he could not understand the true meaning of it. The so-called insightful void was to see the small and see the big picture, to see through the void. My heart's desire, no matter how vast the world is only an inch. The insightful void was an existence above the soul formation stage. Even if it was not as unattainable as the immortal emperor, it was at least a supreme existence and could be considered to be at the top of the food chain. Therefore, the light door in front of him obviously could not have been opened up by this old man who had 1 foot in the grave. If Chun Shi guessed correctly, this small paradise should be an existence similar to the Temple of Time, which was left behind by the ancient immortal cultivators before they left the earth. The old man was just a dove that took over the magpie's nest. If that was the case, then this ghastly old man in front of him, what kind of existence was he? Although Chun Shi had a lot of questions in his mind, his hands did not stop moving at all. After cutting off the old man's arm, Chun Shi immediately turned the sword and pointed it at the old man's chest. The godly sword Dharma idol drew a beautiful arc in the air. The sword light was cold and piercing to the bone. Like a meteor streaking across the sky, it drew a bright silver line in the pitch-black night. Then, the godly sword Dharma idol sank into the old man's chest and directly pierced through him, from the beginning to the end, the old man did not make any movements to fight back. Even when his arm was chopped off, he didn't make a sound. Seeing this, Chun-Shi could not help but raise his eyebrows as if he had realized something. So he immediately let go of the long sword in his hand and suddenly put his hands together in front of his chest, ready to make a gesture. However, just as Chun-Shi was making the gesture, the old man suddenly let out a burst of wild laughter. Immediately after, his body suddenly turned from solid to illusory, as if he had been snapped by Thanos. In an instant, he turned into thousands of powder and disappeared in front of Chun-Shi's eyes. Chun-Shi quickly looked up, only to see black smoke billowing above the church, like the sky before a shower, as if it would collapse at any time. At this time, the old man's voice suddenly sounded from all directions of the church. "Little kid, you're a bit interesting. Come on, let this old man weigh how much weight you have." As soon as the voice fell, the black smoke that was originally floating above the church slowly flowed. It was unknown what method the old man used, but the billowing black smoke suddenly turned into a solid substance. And then it turned into a giant python that was dozens of meters long out of thin air. The giant python formed by the black smoke coiled into a ball in the air, and its huge body almost covered the entire dome. Its head was in the shape of an inverted triangle. From the moment it appeared, the giant python stuck out its head, spat out its snake tongue, and stared at Chun-Shi with its pair of golden vertical pupils. A suffocating sense of oppression gradually spread in the church. Lin Xian stared at the giant python that suddenly appeared above the church, stunned. When she saw the palm-sized scales on the giant python's body, she was so scared that her eyes rolled back, and she fainted directly. Lin Xian's fainting attracted Chun-Shi's attention. However, the moment he was distracted, the giant python was like a long arrow that was shot out from a fully drawn bow, opening its bloody mouth and directly pouncing towards Chun-Shi's position. Fortunately, Chun-Shi's reaction was extremely fast. Pretending to be mysterious, accompanied by an angry shout, Chun-Shi suddenly separated his hands, and 2 rays of golden light suddenly bloomed from his palms. When the giant python was about to bite him, Chun-Shi was like a llama holding 2 large cymbals in his hands, and suddenly slapped out with both palms, ruthlessly hitting the giant python's head. The giant python was formed by the black smoke, and the black smoke was the true yuan that leaked from the old man's body. Therefore, this was actually a contest of true yuan. The true yuan in Chun-Shi's body was clear and pure, but the true yuan in the old man's body was filthy and turbid. When the two came into contact, it was like throwing metallic sodium into water and immediately caused a violent explosion. The 8-leaf seal. Chapter 310. The old man in front of him was very strange. Even with Chun-Shi's experience, he did not know what kind of cultivation method the old man was cultivating. Naturally, he could not determine the old man's exact strength. The only thing he could be sure of was the old man had accumulated too much true origin in his body. It was so much that it was unbelievable. However, at the same time, because this huge amount of true origin was too turbid, the old man was unable to control the true origin in his body as he wished. Hence, after much consideration, Chun-Shi finally put down the long sword in his hand and decided to meet the giant python head-on. He wanted to use this to determine the old man's true strength. The Great Vajra Wheel Seal was not the most lethal move among the 8-leaf seals, but it was the most powerful one. If one were to compare the Great Vajra Wheel Seal with the most lethal move, the Heaven Flipping Seal, it would be like the difference between a mace and a long sword. Hence, the moment Chun-Shi's palms landed on the giant python's head, the giant python was like a train that had crashed into a wall. Its huge body immediately froze in midair. At the same time, with Chun-Shi's position as the center of the circle, an invisible shockwave suddenly erupted. Wherever the shockwave went, the tables, chairs, doors, windows, and even the steel bars in the walls of the church were all reduced to dust. Dust flew everywhere, and smoke rose into the air. In the blink of an eye, the solemn church had been completely reduced to ruins. Just the shock wave from the collision alone was so powerful. One could only imagine how powerful this move was. The giant python let out a loud hiss. Then, its body suddenly cracked inch by inch as if it was made of glass and gradually fell apart. In the end, the giant python turned into a plume of black smoke and slowly dissipated in the sky above the church. However, although the giant python had disappeared, the black smoke that enveloped the church showed no signs of dissipating. Seeing this, Chunxi's face couldn't help but reveal a cold smile. After this head-on battle, he had more or less figured out the old man's strength. Hence, Chunxi lightly shook his wrist and reached out with his right hand. The divine sword avatar appeared in his hand again. At this moment, the old man's voice suddenly rang out from the black smoke. "Who are you?" He spoke very slowly, and there was even a hint of seriousness in his tone. It was obvious that he had finally realized that the young man before him was no saint. "You wouldn't know him even if I told you." Chunxi brandished the sword in his hand, then looked at the black smoke with a mocking expression and asked, "What's wrong? Are you afraid? How dare you?" The old man flew into a rage. His voice was like a thunderclap, echoing in the black smoke. "Ignorant brat, you don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Do you know that even divine General Tian Du wouldn't dare to be so impudent in front of this old man?" "Divine General?" Hearing this, Chunxi seemed to have heard a joke, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "I've already killed a few of them." After saying that, Chunxi suddenly flew up, and the divine sword Dharma power in his hand suddenly exploded with a dazzling light. The reason why Chunxi chose to attack at this time was that he had thoroughly understood the old man's background. If he guessed correctly, the strange soul-ferrying corpse infant should have been created by this old man. Perhaps it was because of the lack of inheritance. So when the old man relied on this evil technique to form a fake golden core, he had completely embarked on a path of no return. One had to admit that this old man was quite impressive. He didn't even have a real golden core, but he had already begun to explore the method of forming yuanying. What to do if there was no path? Then he had to open up a new path. By relying on constantly stealing other people's souls and essence to strengthen himself, the old man had actually opened up a path that was completely different from others. If one followed the conventional path of cultivation, then after repeatedly refining the golden core until it was pure and ethereal, one could use this golden core as a foundation to form yuanying. If the golden core was compared to a seed, then yuanying was obviously the fruit of the seed after it sprouted and bloomed. Therefore, without a golden core, it was naturally impossible to form yuanying. But in this world, there were always exceptions. Perhaps it was because of his rich imagination. When the old man realized that he couldn't break through to yuanying, he thought of a method that Chunxi had never heard of before. That was, using his own physical body as a foundation, he could turn his entire being into something similar to yuanying. One had to know that yuanying was just a form of energy. Turning himself into a yuanying, wouldn't he have to turn himself into a ghost? Half human, half ghost? And this was the real reason why she couldn't hurt the old man. After all, in this sky full of black smoke, every wisp, it was all his fault. He didn't even have a body, so naturally he wouldn't be hurt. Therefore, if Chunxi really wanted to kill the old man, he had to completely destroy this black smoke, not leaving a single wisp behind. Otherwise, the old man would sooner or later use the method of plundering to return him to his peak. Getting rid of evil for the people was a great thing. As an outstanding young man in the new era, Chunxi naturally killed every single one of these scourges he saw as a way to accumulate good karma. Thus, after understanding the old man's background, Chunxi flew into the sky like a sharp sword. Then he held the godly sword Dharma idol in his hand and waved it in the air. Suddenly, 7 identical long swords appeared beside him. Every single one of them was the same as the godly sword Dharma idol in his hand. Although the old man didn't know what Chunxi was going to do, he knew that it wasn't simple just by looking at his posture. Thus, before Chunxi launched his attack, the black smoke in the air surged violently. The black smoke gathered in one place. In the blink of an eye, it actually turned back into a giant python with 3 heads. It coiled in the air and madly flicked its tongue at Chen-Shi. The 7 long swords hung in the air. The 3-headed giant python raised its heads high, as if it could pounce on Chen-Shi at any time. At this moment, Chen-Shi suddenly waved the long sword in his hand, the tip of the sword pointing directly at the ruins of the church. The 7 long swords immediately seemed to have received an order, turning into 7 streams of light and shooting towards the ground. The 3-headed giant python thought that the swords were going to shoot at it, so it let out an earth-shattering hiss. However, what the old man didn't expect was that the longsword's target wasn't it at all. After the 7 long swords shot into the ruins of the church, they suddenly shot out 7 towering beams of light like searchlights that were electrified. The 7 beams of light were slanted, converging on the long sword in Chen-Shi's hand. The old man sensed that danger was approaching, so he raised the 3 ferocious snake heads and pounced directly at Chen-Shi's position. But it was a pity it was too late. Chen-Shi shouted angrily, "Formation rise!" A conical light shield that covered the entire church slowly rose in the night sky. Since this old thief was neither a human nor a ghost, and could transform into thousands of bodies, Chen-Shi could only cast an inescapable net and take him down in one fell swoop. Heavenly Slaying Formation. Chapter 3:11. The formation was complete. Under the dark night sky, the golden light shield was particularly eye-catching. Fortunately, this place was relatively remote and there were no high-rise buildings nearby. Otherwise, Chen-Shi would probably be able to see his great achievements on various short video apps tomorrow. The light shield was like an inescapable net, firmly trapping the 3-headed python that the old man had transformed into. The python continuously used its huge body to hit the light shield. However, the light shield seemed to be like a red-hot steel plate. As soon as the python's body touched the light shield, it immediately let out a soft bang sound. Following that, its muscles and scales turned into a wisp of black smoke and dissipated. After a few fruitless attempts, the python could only coil in the air, raising its 3 heads and continuously sticking out its scarlet tongue at Chen-Shi. A trapped beast in a desperate situation. Even if it could not escape, its ferocious and terrifying appearance still made people feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. The old man was in danger, and Chen-Shi's situation was actually not much better than his. This old monster's battle strength was not very high, but his vitality was extremely tenacious. Because the old man had turned himself into a soul, he could split into thousands of bodies, and every wisp of black smoke was him. If Chen-Shi missed a wisp of black smoke, then the old man could use this wisp of black smoke to escape and then continue to devour others. He believed that as long as his lifespan was not up, there would be a day when the vital essence in his body would accumulate to the point where it could not be contained and could only leak out from his body. Therefore, Chen-Shi decided to take the risk and use himself as the eye of the formation, multitasking 7 things at once, using the 7 divine swords to replace the formation door, thus trapping the old man in the net. This was actually a very risky action. It was like a python wanting to devour another python of similar size. Although the old man's realm was not as high as his, the vital essence in his body was more than Chen-Shi's. Once Chen-Shi swallowed the old man into his stomach, as long as the old man broke through the formation, then he would definitely suffer from the backlash. Therefore, Chen-Shi immediately activated the formation, and before the old man regained his senses, he had to end the battle quickly. He saw that a flame floated up. It blossomed from the void and cascaded down like a world-cleansing red lotus. Although the flame was small, when it fell on the 3-headed giant python, it was like a spark falling on a gas station, instantly setting off a huge fire. The fire was as quick as lightning, spreading along the python's body. In the blink of an eye, the 3-headed giant python was already on fire. It could only twist its body and madly roll and dance in the sea of fire. Then, the three-headed python turned into a cloud of smoke and dissipated in the sea of fire. The giant python had disappeared, but there was still a lot of black smoke gathered below. Thus, the flames continued to spread downwards. The flames swept over, and the black smoke couldn't retreat in time. However, due to the limitations of the light barrier, the places where the black smoke could hide became smaller and smaller. Soon, the flames caught up to it. When the flames came into contact with the black smoke, it was like a raging fire coming into contact with gasoline, exploding violently. In an instant, sparks flew everywhere, and red light filled the sky. The flames filled the light shield, and the light illuminated more than half of the sky, so that a large cloud of fire appeared in the sky above Zhonghai City. The black smoke turned into a black hurricane, crazily colliding with the light shield. The fire slowly burned from the sky to the ground, not leaving a single gap. There was nowhere to run. No, the old man's desperate voice sounded in the light shield. When the raging fire filled the light shield, the remaining wisp of black smoke could only be completely swept away by the fire. Because this old man's life was too tenacious, Chunshi let the fire burn for a full 5 minutes before he finally dispersed his chi and let everything return to normal. After the fire, the church had long been reduced to nothing. In the burnt ruins, Lin Xian lay on the ground, safe and sound. Chunshi came to Lin Xian's side, and just as he was thinking about whether to wake her up, a wisp of black smoke quietly emerged from the crack in the ground. Because the wisp of black smoke was too weak, even Chunshi didn't notice it. Until this wisp of black smoke floated in front of Li Xiaowen and directly went into his nostrils. Only then did she finally notice the difference in Li Xiaowen's body. Perhaps because his mental state was better than Lin Xian, Li Xiaowen was paralyzed on the ground and saw the entire process of the battle between the old man and Chunshi. He stared blankly at Chunshi. His eyes were empty, as if he had lost his soul, and his mind was blank. Li Xiaowen was in a daze. Until the wisp of black smoke went into his nostrils, Li Xiaowen smelled something foul and couldn't help but sniff. This sniff was terrible. Li Xiaowen felt dizzy on the spot. Immediately after, there was a sharp pain in his head. That pain seemed to come from the depths of his soul, and he couldn't help but cry out in pain. Chunshi turned his head to look and saw Li Xiaowen rolling on the ground in pain. "It hurts. Chunshi, save me." Li Xiaowen's voice was hoarse, and he let out a barely discernible cry for help. Seeing this, Chunshi shook his head slightly, as if he didn't see anything, and calmly retracted his gaze. The evils we bring upon ourselves are the hardest to bear. With that, Chunshi used his inner yuan to lift Lin Xian and flew straight into the pitch-black night sky with her. From the perspective of an immortal cultivator, even if the physical body died, the soul would still be there. As long as the soul didn't disappear, it wasn't considered a true death. Especially after an immortal cultivator condensed yuaning, even if the physical body was damaged and various functions died, they could still let the yuaning out of the body, and thus maintain the state of the soul. Yuaning contained the essence of an immortal cultivator, and other than the cultivation, it also contained the immortal cultivator's 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. Thus, as long as the yuaning didn't disappear, then, theoretically speaking, an immortal cultivator wouldn't die. But unfortunately, yuaning couldn't be separated from the physical body for too long. The heavenly Tao was orderly, and this was the law of heaven and earth that an immortal cultivator couldn't violate. Once the yuaning left the body, as long as it didn't return to the body after a certain time limit, then no matter how powerful the immortal cultivator was, he would silently perish under the influence of the heavenly Tao, without leaving a trace. Because of this restriction, even though the old man was half human and half ghost, he still didn't abandon his rotting physical body. Thus, if the physical body died unexpectedly, then the immortal cultivator had to find a new body before the yuaning disappeared. This was also known as possession, possessing another person's body to maintain one's own life. Fortunately, this kind of behavior would be restricted by the heavenly Tao. An immortal cultivator could only possess another body once in their lifetime, and if they forcefully attempted a second time, they would only die tragically. At the same time, the side effects of possessing another person's body were huge. If an immortal cultivator was compared to a car, then their physical body would be the outer shell of the car, and the yuanying would be the engine. The old man used to own a Lamborghini, but because of a car accident, the body of the car was smashed into scrap metal, so he could only take out the engine and find a new body. If he could find a Lamborghini of the same model and install his engine, then he would naturally be able to unleash 100% of its power. But the problem was, everyone was a Lamborghini, so why would he let someone else possess his body? If he couldn't find a Lamborghini of the same model, for example, if he installed the Lamborghini's engine on a Wollongong, even if the car could run, it would definitely not be able to unleash its original power. It might even cause irreversible damage to the engine because the various parts didn't match. Thus, unless they were at the end of their rope, immortal cultivators wouldn't choose to possess another person's body. The old man's injuries were too severe, and he had no other choice, so he chose Li Xiaowen. If it was in the past, Chunshi would definitely save Li Xiaowen for old time's sake. But his actions today had angered Chunshi, so naturally, Chunshi couldn't help him. Possession was a life and death game in itself. The strong would live, and the weak would die. The old man was only left with a remnant soul, and Li Xiaowen wasn't an ordinary person without any cultivation, since they were on par. Then let them fight it out. Anyway, no matter who survived in the end, that body wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Chunshi left. Li Xiaowen lay on the ground, struggling in pain. At this moment, a series of urgent sirens suddenly sounded under the dark night sky. More than 10 A6 cars surrounded the ruins of the church. Chapter 312. By the time Lin Xian woke up, it was already 2 o'clock in the morning. Lin Xian covered her head and looked around before realizing that she was already home. Chunshi. After subconsciously calling out this name, Lin Xian quickly sat up from the sofa. Immediately after, an indescribable feeling welled up in her heart. Could it be? Is he a superhero hidden in human society? Superman? Batman? An otherworldly expert who vanquished demons and defended the Tao, who acted in a chivalrous and righteous manner but did not leave his name behind. Lin Xian saw too many things tonight that were beyond her imagination. So even after waking up, she still felt like she was living in a dream. For a moment, she couldn't tell if this was reality or a dream. Just as Lin Xian was sitting on the sofa thinking, Chunshi suddenly walked out of the kitchen with a bowl of porridge. "You're awake? You were frightened just now. So, I made you a bowl of walnut porridge. It has the effect of calming the mind and nourishing the brain. Try it." While speaking, Chunshi handed the bowl to Lin Xian. After Lin Xian took the bowl in a daze, Chunshi smiled and said, "There's more in the pot. You just need to heat it up tomorrow morning." "Okay. Thank you." The atmosphere in the room was a little strange, which also made Chunshi feel a little uncomfortable. Looking at Lin Xian's blank expression, Chunshi didn't know what to say now. So after thinking about it, he was ready to leave. "Well, even if you're fine, you should rest well. I should go back." Chunshi had already reported the situation to Qin Ruoying, and Qin Ruoying wanted him to wait until Lin Xian woke up before leaving. After all, what happened tonight was too strange. If Lin Xian woke up without a shadow by her side, she would probably be very scared. So Qin Ruoying told Chunshi to wait until Lin Xian woke up before leaving. Now that she was awake and the porridge was cooked, Chunshi naturally had to go home to report. "Oh, right, the amulet from before was broken, so I made you a new one. You should wear it. It'll protect you." After that, Chunshi smiled and winked at her. "I'm going. Call me if you need anything." Chunshi left. After the soft sound of the door closing, Lin Xian was like a robot that had been powered up. She suddenly jumped up from the sofa. "Chunshi, wait." Lin Xian quickly chased after him. But when she walked out of the door, there was already no one in the hallway. Looking at the empty hallway, Lin Xian suddenly had a dazed expression on her face. Just like Mrs. Xianglin, who had lost her soul, she walked back into the house in a daze. When she saw the necklace on the coffee table, Lin Xian's face lit up again. This was a new style necklace. Although she didn't know what material it was made of, it looked very good. At least it was much better than the inferior Guanyin statue she used to wear. Lin Xian put the necklace on her neck, then carefully touched the pendant on the necklace with her hands. The pendant's design was very delicate. It looked like Cartier's latest design, but the craftsmanship seemed to be more detailed than the original. She kept playing with the pendant like this, until a long time later. She seemed to have thought of something happy, and a faint smile suddenly appeared on her face. But there was an indescribable feeling in that smile. As the saying goes, 9 out of 10 things in life don't go your way, but you can't tell anyone. Birth, old age, illness, and death, love, hate, and separation, it's all just like this. When Chunxi returned home, Nian Yin was already asleep, and Qin Ruoying was sitting on the sofa, cultivating alone. At this moment, their family was no different from thousands of ordinary families. The husband worked overtime and came home late, while the wife waited silently at home. Because Chunxi walked silently, it wasn't until he sat next to Qin Ruoying that Qin Ruoying finally noticed his arrival. Qin Ruoying opened her eyes. When she saw Chunxi's smiling face, she couldn't help but smile. "You're back? How's Xian?" "She looks okay. She shouldn't be too shocked. I think she'll be able to digest what she saw tonight." "Okay, then I'll call her tomorrow. If she's scared, I'll accompany her." "Okay." The two exchanged a few simple words. Then Chunxi leaned forward and kissed Qin Ruoying on the forehead before saying, "I'll go see Nian Yin." "Go." Chunxi got up and went to the bedroom. As soon as he opened the door, he saw the little thing lying on the bed with her limbs spread out. Recently, the temperature had gradually risen, probably because of the heat, so in addition to kicking the quilt away, this little girl also unconsciously lifted the hem of her clothes, revealing half of her stomach. Looking at her white little belly, Chunxi couldn't help but smile. This naughty egg, she doesn't even sleep well. After adjusting the little girl's sleeping position, Chunxi gently covered her with a cold quilt. This old house in Zhonghai didn't have air conditioning, so he gently snapped his fingers. As the true essence gushed out, a faint coolness suddenly appeared in the room. Blowing the air conditioner and covering the quilt in summer was a great joy in life, so this little girl's breathing suddenly became much more relaxed. Chunxi sat on the edge of the bed, silently looking at her cute little face. After a while, Qin Ruoying quietly came to the bedroom. You see, it's already 2 o'clock. How about we don't go today?" Hearing this, Chunxi immediately took Qin Ruoying's hand and gently pulled her to his side. "Okay, I'll listen to you. Tonight, we'll stay at home and not go anywhere," the couple whispered to each other by the bed. The place they were talking about was actually the Temple of Time in Karakoram, Kunlun. Since Chunxi got the soul crystal, he would take Qin Ruoying to the Temple of Time every night to cultivate. The 8 times difference naturally made Qin Ruoying's realm progress by leaps and bounds. But at the same time, it also made them spend less time with Nian Yin, even if it was only when Nian Yin was sleeping. Therefore, after deciding not to cultivate tonight, the couple each lay on one side, sandwiching the little guy in the middle. And because the bed was not too big, the couple could only lean against the bed when sleeping, leaving enough space for the little guy to play around. After all, blood was thicker than water. Even if this thing was immersed in sleep, she seemed to be able to sense that her parents were beside her. Therefore, this little thing would turn over from time to time. For a while, she would put her legs on Chunxi's body, and for a while, she would turn over and put her hands on Qin Ruoying's body. Who knew how many times she had tossed back and forth in the night? On a spring night, the pale moon covered the sky, graceful and graceful. Every time a breeze swept through the treetops, it would bring a melodious and soothing rustling sound. It was indeed a good night to sleep. When Chunxi noticed that Qin Ruoying had also fallen asleep, he was ready to empty his mind and let himself have a good sleep. But at this time, he suddenly thought of someone. It was Wang Shuwu, who was still pressed on the ground by him and couldn't get up. Chunxi raised his head and glanced at the little guy lying on his stomach, sleeping soundly. Then, as if he had made a decision, He gently snapped his fingers. When he left just now, he had already set up a restriction in Wang Shiwu's body. So now, Chun-Shi only needed to move his mind to trigger the restriction, causing the qi in Wang Shiwu's body to reverse, his vitality to go out of control, and foul qi to rush to his head. Then his fate was obviously. Chapter 3:13. When the sun broke through the sky, a new day began. Perhaps it was because of the light rain last night. As soon as Qin Ruoying opened the window, a fragrance mixed with the smell of earth came from outside the house. The warm sunlight sprinkled into the room through the window, and the bright and warm feeling instantly made people feel much better. After a night of charging, the little fellow's sweet voice echoed in the house again. "Papa, I want to eat a treasure porridge. And shrimp dumplings. Shrimp dumplings. Mama, where's the remote control? I want to watch cartoons." Breakfast was not ready yet, so the naughty little fellow jumped back and forth in the house in slippers. No one knew why she was so happy today. Her little face was as red as a ripe apple, and she looked as if she had been injected with stimulants. Qin Ruoying went to the balcony to collect the clothes, and the little fellow immediately followed her out. Then she tiptoed and leaned on the railing, looking up to see the sun in the sky. What she saw was terrible. The dazzling sunlight immediately made her cover her eyes, and she had to cry "Mama" uncomfortably. Silly child. Qin Ruoying smiled and shook her head. She hurriedly squatted beside her and whispered a few words of comfort. "Nian, come on, it's time to eat." She came out of the kitchen with a plate, just in time to see Qin Ruoying whispering to the little fellow on the balcony. The warm sunlight sprinkled on the mother and daughter, as if they were wearing a gauze. It was a very beautiful and warm scene. At this moment, time seemed to have stopped. Chun-Shi looked at them silently, and a warm feeling suddenly surged in his heart. It was worth it. He had no regrets in his life. After breakfast, the couple accompanied the little fellow at home to read poems of the Tang and Song dynasties. Chun-Shi did not want the little fellow to spend all her leisure time watching cartoons, so he racked his brains to find something else for her to do. He wanted her to like it, and, at the same time, it was a very healthy way of leisure. Didn't the little fellow cry to ride a shared bike before? Cycling is not bad. Thinking of this, Chun-Shi's eyes lit up. In fact, children of Nianyan's age should be starting to learn how to ride a bicycle. It was just that they were riding a children's bicycle with 2 balance wheels. Therefore, Chun-Shi wondered if he should buy a children's bicycle for Nianyan and take her to the park to learn how to ride it today. Chun-Shi quietly mentioned his idea to Qin Ruoying, but before Qin Ruoying could reply, the little guy who had been eavesdropping immediately jumped up from the cushion and shouted excitedly, "Cycling is good. I want to ride a bike. Let's go for a ride. Papa, let's go." With that, she jumped off the sofa and dragged Chun-Shi out of the door. As long as it was something that he liked, this little guy's ears were as sensitive as a radar. But if he called her when she was watching cartoons or when she was angry, no matter how many times Chun-Shi said it, this little thing would pretend not to hear it. Chun-Shi carried her back to the sofa, pinched the tip of her nose with his hand, and said with a serious face, "You want to go out to play? Okay, but you have to recite the poem that Mommy just taught you. If you can recite it well, Daddy will take you out to play." Hearing this, the little fellow was not afraid at all. Instead, she proudly raised her little head and said loudly, "I can recite it." "Okay, then recite it to me." Since he said that, the little fellow did not have stage fright. After jumping off the sofa, she ran to the opposite side of the sofa and faced Chun-Shi and Qin Ruoying and recited it loudly. "When I was young, I left home, but when I was old, I returned home. My hometown accent has not changed. When children meet, they don't know each other. Smiling, they ask where you are from." Although the recitation was a bit bumpy and the pronunciation was not very clear, at least she finished reciting Homecoming Book. But after reciting it, this little thing stood in place with her hands behind her back. Her small body swayed left and right, and at the same time, she looked at Chun-Shi with her big eyes. Looking at her lack of confidence, it was obvious that she was nervous so she started to wonder if her back was facing him. Seeing this, Chunshi immediately laughed and applauded. He could not help but praise. Good. You recited it well. You didn't miss a single word. Nian Yin, you're amazing. Although she did not recite it well, at least she finished reciting it. And even if she recited it completely wrong, Chunshi would not blame her. She was a child, so she had to be more confident. It was not easy to raise a child, but it was very easy to destroy a child. Sometimes, even a simple scolding could affect a child's life. For example, that sentence. You can't even remember such a simple thing? A seemingly insignificant scolding from a parent was very likely to leave a shadow in the child, so that they would start to doubt themselves and be more unwilling to learn. The psychology of a child was actually very simple. If they could not learn well after studying hard, it meant that they were very stupid. In that case, why should they study hard? They could not learn well anyway. The denial of a parent would only make the child more suspicious of himself. It had to be said that parents who habitually denied their children and forcibly put pressure on their children were really retarded. Perhaps they might think that their children were like Neza, who needed suffering and encouragement to thrive. Chun-Shi's encouragement obviously worked, so this little thing suddenly relaxed a lot. Then, she opened her arms and threw herself into Chun-Shi's arms, giggling. Papa, am I good? Good. Very good. After Chun-Shi's sincere flattery, this little thing was obviously more active. Like a husky taking a walk, she did not even need Chun-Shi to carry her. She ran downstairs like the wind. Nian Yin, run slower. Don't fall. Qin Ruing hurriedly followed, but she had just taken a few steps when she heard the little thing let out a cry of surprise. Qin Ruoying was shocked. After quickly running downstairs, she saw Nian Yin running out of the building like a wisp of smoke. Then, she happily threw herself into the arms of a person. Hello, sister. The person who came was actually Lin Xian. Qin Ruoying looked at her with some surprise, then quickly stepped forward and asked, Xian, when did you come? Why didn't you call me first? I said I would call you when I arrived, but I didn't expect to see you go out as soon as I arrived. What a coincidence, Lin Xian smiled and explained. But when Qin Ruoying looked at her, there was still a trace of suspicion in her eyes. After all, they were classmates and best friends for many years, so she felt that Lin Xian was a little strange today. Could it be? Chapter 314. Actually, Lin Xian had always known their address, but because the couple had left one after another, she hadn't visited them for many years. Since she was a guest, she couldn't possibly not even let her through the door, right? Therefore, Qin Ring repeatedly invited Lin Xian upstairs, but Lin Xian shook her head repeatedly, saying that she was just passing by to see Nian Yin and would leave soon. Passing by? See Nian Yin? Could she be more careful? Qin Ruoying knew that she was looking for an excuse, but because she couldn't persuade her, she could only accompany her outside the building, chatting while waiting for Chun-Shi to come downstairs. In fact, the moment the little fellow exclaimed, Chun-Shi had already used his divine sense to detect Lin Xian's arrival. Therefore, after he packed up and closed the door, he greeted Lin Xian with a smile from afar. Oh, what a rare guest. That natural action and expression made it seem as if he was greeting a neighbor that he had a good relationship with. It seemed particularly casual and enthusiastic. This kind of natural behavior also gave Lin Xian an illusion in her days. The current him and the him last night, were they really the same person? Su Shi once said, a brave man is not alarmed when faced with a sudden attack. He is not angry when provoked. Even if Mount Tai collapses in front of him, his expression will not change, and his eyes will not blink when the elk rises to the left. This should be the kind of person he was talking about. Lin Xian stared blankly at Chun-Shi until Qin Ruoying patted her in puzzlement, and she finally came back to her senses. Xian, it's rare for you to come. Why don't you go to the park with us today and play with Nian Yin while you're at it? As if to hide her strangeness, Lin Xian quickly nodded and quickly replied, Okay, let's go. I just drove today. You guys wait for me at the gate. I'll go get the car. After saying that, she handed the little fellow to Qin Ring and quickly ran towards the gate of the district. Looking at her flustered appearance, Qin Ring was really confused, so she looked at Chun-Shi and asked, "What's wrong with her? I feel that she's a little strange today. Maybe I scared her last night. It's my fault. I should have knocked her out when I went last night." The couple looked at each other helplessly and felt that this matter was a bit troublesome. In fact, it wasn't that Chun-Shi didn't have the means to erase memories, but this kind of magic more or less had some side effects. Lin Xian was a friend, so he naturally could not use these methods on her. However, how could she, an ordinary person, calmly accept all of this? If she hadn't been so agitated last night, how could she have done such a series of abnormal actions today? What a headache. Because of the little fellow's presence, the adults tacitly put this matter aside for the time being. After that, Lin Xian drove Chun-Shi's family to the mall to buy a pink children's bicycle and then took them to a nearby park. Maybe because the park was too down-to-earth, there was no romantic atmosphere at all, which led to many young people not choosing to come to the park when they were dating. Therefore, this park was either full of uncles and aunties drinking tea and playing cards, or parents bringing their children out to play. As for those young couples in love, they didn't see a single pair. The children's bicycle had 2 balance wheels attached to the rear wheel, so Chun-Shi didn't need to teach it. The little thing kicked its legs and started to move. Who knew where the little fellow got so much energy today? As soon as it got on the bicycle, it ran away without a trace. "Nian Nian, ride slower. Don't hit anyone." Qin Ruoying shouted a few words from behind, but this carefree husky didn't care so much and ran away without a trace. There were a lot of old people and children in the park, and Qin Ring was worried that she couldn't stop the bicycle and hit someone, so she no longer had her usual dignified and calm temperament, and could only trot behind this naughty egg, and at the same time keep shouting for her to ride slower. The naughty daughter ran in front, and the anxious mother chased behind. Such a scene, it actually gave off a warm feeling. Nian Nian is getting more and more lively now. Looking at Qin Ruoying's anxious appearance, Lin Xian couldn't help but sigh with emotion. However, after Chun-Shi finished listening to her words, she smiled and said something that didn't make sense. "I'm not going to waste my time. Didn't we have a song when we were young that went viral all over the country?" "And? What? What song?" Lin Xian was stunned for a moment, obviously confused by his sudden question. Only a mother is good in the world. A child with a mother is like a treasure, into a mother's embrace. Where can you find happiness? Perhaps because she was too easily amused, when she heard Chun-Shi recite these few lines of lyrics, Lin Xian couldn't help but burst out laughing. But then she smiled and shook her head, as if sighing with emotion, and couldn't help but sigh softly. "Yes, a child with a mother is like a treasure. Inging is back. It's great." "Yes, it's great." Chun-Shi smiled and nodded, and then stopped talking. The two silently looked at the mother and daughter who were circling back not far away, and for a moment, it seemed that they didn't want to talk. After a while, Lin Xian seemed to have thought of something, and suddenly turned to look at Chun-Shi and asked with a smile, "Oh, right. Last night, I wasn't dreaming, right?" Hearing this, Chun-Shi didn't want to hide, so he nodded lightly and gave an affirmative answer. "No." "Oh." After hearing Chun-Shi's affirmative answer, Lin Xian suddenly fell silent. Chun-Shi waited for a while, and seeing that she didn't speak, he asked directly, "Last night's incident should have refreshed your understanding of this world, right? How about I give you a simple explanation?" Hearing this, Lin Xian's eyes flashed with a hint of joy, but soon she asked with a worried face, "These things shouldn't be said casually, right? Why not? Just treat it as a story." Then Chun-Shi gave her a simple explanation of the Wu Lian secret. As for the part that involved immortal cultivators, even if Chun-Shi explained it to Lin Xian, she probably wouldn't understand. So he simply omitted this part and replaced the immortal cultivators with warriors that were easier for Lin Xian to understand. Perhaps because of trust, Lin Xian didn't feel that Chun-Shi was telling her a fantasy after hearing this. Instead, she looked thoughtfully at Qin Ruoying, who wasn't far away, and asked, "Then, is Ying also a warrior?" "Yes, I guess so." After hearing Chun Shi's answer, Lin Xian fell silent again. After hesitating for a while, she asked anxiously, "Chun, since these superpowers are obtained through cultivation, can you teach me? You want to learn?" "Yes." Chapter 315. Fight and Kill. After hearing Chun Shi's words, Lin Xian's expression darkened, as if something had touched her heart. Seeing her hesitant look, Chun Shi was a little puzzled. Thus, after pondering for a while, he smiled and explained, "Actually, practicing martial arts is quite easy. If you really want to learn, I can teach you. You can just treat it as if you're practicing Tai Chi." Chun Shi's idea was very simple. He could casually teach Lin Xian some basic Qi refining methods. It could strengthen her body and extend her life. At the same time, it could give her more means of self-defense. This could also prevent her from encountering something similar to last night. After all, to a normal person, it would take a lot of mental fortitude to endure 2 kidnappings. After Chun Shi's suggestion, Lin Xian didn't immediately reply. Instead, she turned her head to look at Ying and Yin, who were playing not far away. Looking at this classmate, friend, and best friend who was already a mother, and then looking at the lively and cute little fellow beside her, Lin Xian suddenly felt an indescribable bitterness in her heart. She always felt that Ying was like Mr. Chao Shuichin's description in Dream of the Red Chamber. When she's quiet, she's like a beautiful flower shining on the water. When she moves, she's like a weak willow swaying in the wind. The heart has one more orifice than the body, and the sickly Shizi wins by 3 points. Although Ying usually looked weak, she was definitely not a pretentious woman. She was gentle, low-key, and reserved. If it wasn't for that beautiful face, it would be easy for people to overlook her existence. After so many years, in Lin Xian's impression, the only time Ying showed off her ability was probably when she publicly rejected Zhao Yuan's love and threw herself into Chun Shi's arms at that moment. Not to mention Chun Shi, even she, a woman, was stunned by Ying's actions. Speaking of which, it was laughable. It was also from that moment onwards that she truly began to notice Chun Shi, this piece of gold that had yet to shine. Lin Xian stood there in a daze as memories of the past flooded his mind. For a moment, he actually stood there in a daze. Chun Shi thought that she was thinking, so after a while, he asked with a smile, "What do you think? Would you like to learn?" Chun Shi's voice pulled Lin Xian back from his chaotic thoughts. She glanced at Chun Shi with a slightly panicked expression before replying, "When are you going back to Shanjing?" "Soon, probably within the next few days. Yin is going to kindergarten. It's time to bring her back to get used to it." "Oh." Lin Xian went silent again. She buried her head and didn't speak for a long time. Because she was half a head shorter than Chun Shi, if Chun Shi didn't use his divine sense, he naturally wouldn't be able to see the expression on her face. Lin Xian was indeed a bit strange today. Chun Shi looked at her in confusion. He wondered if what happened last night had triggered her, so he began to think about how to help her get rid of this shadow. But just as Chun Shi was puzzled, Lin Xian suddenly said this earth-shattering sentence, "Chun Shi, I like you." Her voice was very soft, almost inaudible. But how sensitive was Chun Shi's ears? So after hearing her words, Chun Shi couldn't help but frown. What shouldn't have come finally came. Chun Shi took a step back without leaving a trace. After putting some distance between Lin Xian and himself, he began to think about how to answer her. At this time, Lin Xian suddenly started to cry. Like a frightened ostrich, she buried her head even deeper. As the strong sense of guilt gushed out from the bottom of her heart, she could no longer hold back her tears, and they slid down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I like you, just like how the wind flies for 8,000 miles without asking when it will return. Was it wrong to like someone? It was wrong. It was a big mistake. Because she liked a married man, and this man was also her best friend's husband. Mistake upon mistake. But was this really her fault? Actually, the trajectory of fate had changed the moment Chun Shi came back. If it wasn't for the accidental encounter that day, perhaps she would have accepted Li Xiaowen's pursuit. After all, how could she not be curious about a man who could make such an outstanding woman like Ying fall in love with him? It was this damned curiosity that made her sink deeper and deeper. There was nothing wrong with liking someone. Liking someone you shouldn't be liking, that was wrong. Lin Xian was very clear about this, so she had always carefully kept her heart in the corner, hoping that one day, when she took it out again, there would be no trace of that person left behind. When you like someone, but you have to bear the pain and bitterness by yourself, she had already made a big mistake. In fact, it was not difficult to realize that one was wrong. It was just that this mistake was harder to correct than one would expect. From the encounter in the shop window, to the fire in the unfinished building, from the short time they spent together at the wedding, to the despair and helplessness she felt when she was lying on the altar, just when she was most afraid, Chunxi broke through the door at that moment. Just like how she opened the curtains in the morning, the bright and beautiful sunlight shone directly into the darkest corner of her heart. The originally blurry figure gradually became clearer in Lin Xian's heart. This also made her unable to see anything else. Everything in the world was overshadowed. In her eyes, there was only the figure that she yearned for day and night. Finally, Lin Xian couldn't control herself anymore. At this moment, she spilled out her heart that had been hidden for a long time. "I'm sorry, I like you." Like a primary school student who made a mistake, Lin Xian lowered her head and apologized to Qinshi again. Her voice sounded like she was about to cry, but at the same time, there was a bit of sadness, pain, and bitterness. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have disturbed you. When you fell in love with someone, you shouldn't have. Even a confession would become a mistake." Qinshi finally understood why Lin Xian was absent-minded today. He silently looked at Lin Xian. After a long silence, Qinshi said with a serious face, "Don't say sorry. There's nothing wrong with liking someone." At this point, Qinshi couldn't help but turn his head to look in Qin Ruoying's direction. At this time, Qin Ruoying seemed to have sensed something, so she raised her head and looked at Qinshi from afar. But then, Qin Ruoying suddenly smiled and nodded slightly at Qinshi. They didn't have the wings of a colorful phoenix, but their hearts were connected. After getting the approval of his wife, Qinshi coughed lightly and continued to say to Lin Xian, Xian, you're a good girl, but you can't spoil things like feelings. Actually, I think you should open your heart and look at the world in another way. That way, you will have new discoveries and not like now, where you lock yourself in a small room. If I really want to say sorry, I should be the one saying it. I'm sorry, I don't know what I should say now." Looking at Lin Xian, who kept her head down and didn't speak, Qinshi couldn't help but laugh awkwardly after saying a lot of chicken soup for the soul. "This kind of thing really gives me a headache." Qinshi really didn't know what to say. The wind in the park blew gently, and the two were speechless. After a while, Lin Xian suddenly raised her head and sniffed gently. She forced a smile on her face and said, "I'm sorry, I forgot myself. There's nothing wrong with liking someone, but I did something wrong. My mistake was that I shouldn't have said it out loud, because it would make me seem selfish and completely disregard other people's feelings. I'm sorry, I hope you guys don't mind." She said "you guys," so this apology was obviously meant for Qin Ruoying. When Qinshi heard this, he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief and quickly said, "It's fine. I have a bad memory, haha." Lin Xian was amused by his silly look. The moment she laughed, she was like a lotus flower at the beginning of the summer rain, beautiful beyond compare. "Thank you. I've thought it through. Feelings are actually like what you just said. You can't spoil them." Speaking of this, Lin Xian reached out and tucked the scattered hair behind her ear. Then, as if nothing had happened, she smiled at Qinshi and said, "I have something to do later, so I won't accompany you guys today. I'll leave first." "Okay, be careful when you drive." "Goodbye." "Goodbye." After smiling and waving at Qinshi, Lin Xian turned around and quickly walked away. But after taking a few steps, she suddenly turned around and asked Qinshi loudly, "Hey, Qinshi, are we still friends?" This question, Li Xiaowen just asked her yesterday. So when Lin Xian couldn't help but ask Qinshi the same question, the smile on her face suddenly froze. But fortunately, Qinshi didn't disappoint her. "Of course, You're one of the few friends Ying and I have. Be careful on the road. If anything happens, call me. Thank you." After hearing Qi's affirmative answer, Lin Xian couldn't help but smile happily. But when she turned around, her vision instantly blurred. Bean-sized teardrops gushed out crazily like a flood that had broken through a dam. After Lin Xian's figure disappeared from sight, Shi silently retracted his divine sense and then came to Qin Ruiying's side. The husband and wife stood side by side and quietly watched the naughty little guy run around the park. This kind of thing should be reported to his wife, but Shi really didn't know where to start. Qin Ruiying seemed to sense his strangeness, so she took the initiative to reach out her right hand and gently held Shi's left hand. "I know, Xian didn't do it on purpose." Hearing this, Shi couldn't help but look at Qin Ruiying with slight surprise, but he only saw Ying's peaceful smile. Didn't do it on purpose. Just these 5 simple words, but unconsciously pointed out a lot of important things. Sure enough, Ying was as low-key, smart, virtuous, and considerate as always. Thinking of this, Shi couldn't hold it in anymore and kissed her heavily in front of everyone. Immediately, Qin Ruiying's face was filled with disgust as she said coquettishly, "Annoying. I still like you very much, like the wind that flies 8,000 miles, not asking when it will return." Chapter 316. 3 days later. Because of her bad mood, Lin Xian took a week of sick leave and didn't go to work recently. Mental illness was also an illness, and there was no cure for it. Therefore, for most of the 3 days, she just hugged her legs and sat quietly on the sofa in a daze. She didn't turn on the lights, and the curtains were tightly drawn. Only in the darkness could she find a trace of warmth. Although she had never been in love, the lingering disappointment and sadness still lingered in her heart. She didn't want to think about it, but she couldn't control herself. She couldn't help but think of that figure, and that was why she was in so much pain. Time passed by just like that. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Ding dong. Lin Xian was shocked. She thought that her dream had come true, so a trace of joy immediately appeared on her face. When you miss someone in your heart, you knew that it was impossible, but the moment you opened the door, you would still hope that the person behind the door would be the one you thought about day and night. And this, it was just a kind of self-deception, so she quickly came back to her senses. After all, why would Shi come to her house for no reason? Who was knocking on the door? Lin Xian glanced outside through the peephole and saw a middle-aged man in a black suit standing outside the door with a serious face. Who is it? For safety reasons, Lin Xian didn't open the door immediately. Instead, she asked through the door, "Miss Lin, hello. My name is Qin Shui. I'm Mr. Chen's friend. He asked me to pass something to you." Huh? Lin Xian looked through the peephole repeatedly for a while. After confirming that Qin Shui didn't look like a bad person, she opened the door a little. Qin Shui was tactful. After passing the file in his hand to Lin Xian through the security door, he immediately took a step back and said, "Miss Lin, Mr. Chen might not have mentioned me to you. You can take a look. This is my business card. I was asked by Mr. Chen to call you no matter what difficulties you encounter in the future. I think I should be able to help." "All right, thank you. Sorry to trouble you." Lin Xian remained vigilant towards this stranger who was so friendly to her for the first time. After thanking him politely, she quickly closed the door. Bang! Seeing this, Qin Shui could only smile helplessly, then turn around and return to the elevator. While he was waiting for the elevator, 2 men in black suits appeared out of nowhere and followed him into the elevator. "I've checked. This girl is just an ordinary person. You two will transfer a group of people from the branch and divide them into 2 groups to protect her 24/7, understand?" Understood. Although Shi had already killed the old man whom Steward Sun regarded as his heavenly father, he did not have the time to play hide-and-seek with the remnants of the Zhenli sect. For the sake of Lin Xian's safety, Shi simply handed this important task to Qin Shui. He hoped that Qin Shui could protect Lin Xian for a period of time until the Zhenli sect was completely wiped out by the Wu Yan. Qin Shui did not understand the situation. When he saw that Lin Xian was a young and beautiful girl, He naturally could not help but misunderstand the situation. Therefore, he valued Lin Xian's personal safety so much. Lin Xian did not know what had happened. It was not until she opened the document bag and saw what Chun Shi had left for her that she suddenly realized Chun Shi and his family had already left. They did not even leave a word of farewell. The only thing in the file was a handwritten draft with a fountain pen. Although it was a draft, it was written in one go without any mistakes. Moreover, the handwriting was very neat. It could be said that the strokes were like dragons and snakes. Lin Xian looked at the contents of the draft and realized that this should be the cultivation method that Chun Shi had mentioned before. There were 2 parts in total. One part was the Qi cultivation chapter, and the other part was the Qi cultivation chapter. Lin Xian looked at the flowing handwriting and suddenly heard Chun Shi's rhythmic voice. It was as if Chun Shi was by her side at this moment and was guiding her on how to cultivate. She did not know why, but after randomly flipping through the draft in her hand, Lin Xian's mood suddenly became much better. Therefore, she clenched her delicate fists as if to encourage herself. She pouted and said loudly, Xian, do your best. Do your best. Even if it was just an impossible dream, she would continue to live in it. It would be best if she would never wake up. Changjing Dongming Alley. It was a familiar place with a strong smell of Beijing. The taxi had just stopped at the entrance of the alley when the naughty little guy impatiently pushed open the door and ran out like a wisp of smoke. While running, she shouted at the top of her lungs, Big cat! Big cat! Big cat! Her sweet voice echoed in the alley. As if in response to her shout, a sharp cat's cry suddenly sounded from behind the wall. Meow! A black shadow leaped onto the wall and stood on top of it, looking around. That silly look on his face, wasn't that the big cat that she had not seen for a long time? The big cat stood on the wall and looked for a while. When it saw the little guy's familiar smiling face, it immediately ran along the wall. Its movements were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it was already above the little guy's head. Then it spread out its limbs and jumped from the wall, directly pouncing on the little guy on the ground. Meow! Perhaps it was because it had not seen its little master for a long time, so this guy was especially enthusiastic. Big cat. Looking at the big cat pouncing on her, the little guy immediately opened her arms happily and made a gesture to catch it. However, just as the big cat was about to pounce on the little guy, a big hand suddenly grabbed it in mid-air. Meow! The big cat looked at Chun Shi with a dumbfounded expression. But before it could recover, Chun Shi slapped it on the head. Look at you, how fat are you? Can a 5-year-old child like her catch you? While speaking, Chun Shi also weighed the big cat's weight. It must be more than 10 kilograms, right? It had only been a few months, and this guy was about to grow into a Garfield cat. Become smaller. How can she carry you when you're so fat? Chun Shi pinched the big cat with a look of disgust. But after the big cat heard this, it could only respond with an innocent face. Meow. This guy's cultivation had advanced by leaps and bounds, so its body was getting bigger and bigger. Although it could change its size, there was a limit to this transformation. It could not become smaller than a mouse, right? Therefore, its current size was already the smallest it could ever be. Chun Shi understood what the big cat meant. But when he looked down and saw Ninian's hopeful little eyes, he immediately said to the big cat in an unquestionable tone, You can't become smaller, right? I'll help you. Chapter 317. After Chun Shi's gentle massage, the big cat's originally plump body shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. As a cat, of course, it's better to be more agile. Perhaps it was because she hadn't seen the big cat for a long time, so the little thing was particularly clingy today. When she tiptoed and raised her small hands, happily taking the big cat from Chun Shi's hands, she immediately put her rosy little face on the big cat and kept rubbing it. After rubbing it for a while, the little thing used both hands to hold the big cat and raised it in front of her. Then she looked into its eyes and asked seriously, Big cat, did you miss me? Meow, 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 meow. This little thing was quite sensible. It knew that its only mission was to make Ninian happy, So after a few calls, it stuck out its tongue and licked Nian Yan's little face. The slippery feeling immediately made the little thing giggle. The little thing stood there with the big cat in her arms. She waited for a while, then carried her and the cat, and went straight to the courtyard. Nian Yan, let's go home. What should we do when we see Grandpa later? I know. We have to take the initiative to say hello to Grandpa. Smart. The family of 3 walked into the courtyard. Just as they turned the screen wall and came to the door of the drooping flower, a figure slowly walked out from the main hall. Wasn't that Qin Yongyan, who had been away for a long time? Just by standing there casually, he naturally exuded a scholarly temperament, which gave people a feeling of transcendence, as if he was as deep as an abyss and as high as a mountain. Seeing this, Chun-Shi bent down and put the little thing on the ground, and the little thing bent down and put the big cat on the ground. Then, she opened her arms and ran all the way to the main hall. Grandpa, Grandpa, we're back. The little thing ran very fast with her short legs. Qin Yongyan seemed to be afraid that she would accidentally fall, so he quickly walked down the stairs. Oh, Nian Yan is back. Did you miss Grandpa? Yes. I miss Grandpa so much. Oh, Nian Yan is so good. Qin Yongyan gently picked up the little thing from the ground. Soon after, the little thing happily tossed and turned in his arms. That mischievous look immediately made Qin Yongyan laugh. As people get older, most people would like children more and more. And this should be the so-called generation gap affection. When Qin Yongyan saw Qin Yongyan and the couple called out Dad, the smile on his face, Qin Yongyan's face became even brighter. The whole family stood in the courtyard and chatted for a while. Then, Qin Yongyan seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly reached out and pinched the little thing's little face. Then he smiled and asked, Ying, this child's birthday is coming soon, right? Yes, it will be in half a month. Just as Qin Ruoying finished speaking, before Qin Yongyan could say anything, the little thing in his arms suddenly turned her head. The little thing didn't say anything. She just stared at Qin Ruoying with her big, watery eyes. At that moment, there was a timid and expectant expression on her rosy little face. Birthday, for this little thing who didn't have parents since she was young, it was a feeling that she had never experienced before. Although Nian Yan was still young, she already knew a lot of things. A child's memory was fragmented, so she only vaguely remembered that Aunt Zhang would cook her a sumptuous dinner and buy her 1 or 2 little toys that she liked on her birthday. Because her parents had never celebrated her birthday with her, she never felt that there was anything wrong with Aunt Zhang's arrangement. But every time she played with other children in the neighborhood, she would always hear the other children bragging about how they celebrated their birthdays. Where did Daddy take me to play today? What did Mommy buy me? How big was the cake? How fun was the birthday present? Comparing was a very common behavior among children. Whenever the little thing was not convinced, she would pout her little mouth and shout, When it's my birthday, Grandma will also cook delicious food for me. She will also buy me toys. As she spoke, she waved a rainbow ring in her hand, trying to prove that her birthday was also very good. Nian Yan was very satisfied with her birthday present, but the other children didn't think so. Children nowadays were very smart. Of course, they knew what toys were expensive and what toys were rare. The rainbow ring in Nian Yan's hand was only sold for 3 yuan at the small store at the entrance. Of course, they didn't care about it. It was also because of this that Nian Yan didn't like to play with them later on, because she would always be ostracized, ridiculed, and mocked by others. Ba, wild child. She's a wild child without parents. Don't play with her. Wild child. Perhaps it was because she thought of these unhappy past events. The smile on the little thing's face suddenly faded a lot. Fortunately, Chun-Shi's eyes were sharp and almost instantly noticed the change in her expression. Therefore, after thinking for a while, Chun-Shi roughly understood her state of mind. Thus, he hurried to Qin Yongyan's side and took the little thing into his arms. Then he asked with a gentle face, Nian Yan, it's your birthday next month. What birthday present do you want? Hearing this, the little thing pursed her little mouth and shook her head. She didn't say anything, but the little hand that grabbed Chun-Shi's clothes tightened. Nian Yan, good girl. What birthday present do you want? Chun-Shi caressed her little face, encouraging her to tell her what she wanted for her birthday. However, the little thing didn't know why. After pursing her little mouth for a while, she actually burst into tears. The sudden turn of events stunned everyone. Chun-Shi hurriedly hugged her and comforted her patiently. However, the little thing was crying while reaching out her hands to Qin Ruoying. Mama, Mama, no matter how naughty and mischievous a child was, she was still just a child. Where her peers were ostracizing her and mocking her, how strong did this child have to be to silently bear all this? Mama, Mama, the little thing lay on Qin Ruoying's shoulder and cried heartbreakingly. Mother and daughter were connected by heart. When Qin Ruoying saw her sad look, she suddenly felt touched and couldn't help but cry. She quickly hugged the little thing even tighter. Nyan, don't cry, don't cry. Mother is here, don't cry, don't cry. A child's mood was like the weather in June. It could change at any time. Qin Yongyan never thought that his casual question would touch on this little thing's sad matter. However, these sad things had happened a long time ago. So, after Qin Ruoying gently comforted her for a while, the little thing slowly stopped crying. Chun-Shi stood by the side and didn't say anything. Seeing that the little fellow's emotions were gradually calming down, he let out a heavy sigh of relief. His daughter was already 5 years old, and, as a father, it was his first time preparing a birthday present for his daughter. It had been 5 years. When he thought of this, there was only one thought left in Chun-Shi's mind. I love you, so I want to give the whole world to you. And this was the deepest and most profound feeling he had for Nyan. People called it when the tide receded, the hole would spew out the things that were previously swallowed, so no creature was willing to settle down here. Such a natural deep-sea cave was definitely a place that explorers would dream of. But it was a pity the hole was very small, almost the size of an elevator door. It was impossible for a large deep-sea submarine to enter. Chun-Shi used his chi to protect his body and quickly swam through the depths of the cave like a sailfish. The cave was very deep and complicated. There were many passages connected. Each passage went left and right and connected to small caves one after another. It was like a spiderweb maze, and there was no telling where the end was. There was no light in the cave, so Chun-Shi lit up a light ball. Where the light reached, all kinds of underwater plants immediately reflected colorful light. Like a flexible fish swimming through the cave, after about 2 or 3 minutes, Chun-Shi came to the end of the cave. Then, he directly floated to the surface of the water. This place had turned out to be a waterless cave. It was like an inverted cup in a basin. Because there was air in the cave, the seawater could not rush in. This was common knowledge in physics that even elementary school students knew, but it was impossible to find such a place in reality. Unless the walls of the cave were specially processed to withstand the pressure and erosion of the seawater to ensure that the air in the cave would not leak and to maintain a stable air pressure, thus resisting the pressure of the seawater. Obviously, this cave had been modified by Chun-Shi. Otherwise, it was impossible for the seawater not to rush in. The cave was about 40 to 50 meters deep, 10 meters wide, and 7 to 8 meters high. The end of the pool was slightly narrower, looking like an egg. Chun-Shi pushed the light ball in his hand into the air, and the strong light suddenly illuminated the entire cave. In the cave, there were people. Chun-Shi looked up and saw 2 people floating in the air with their arms and legs spread out. They looked like Jesus on the cross. So, have you thought about it? Chun-Shi slowly walked into the depths of the cave. As he walked, he said this to the 2 of them. Chun-Shi's voice was not loud, but after his voice fell, the cave kept echoing for a long time. Cough! After hearing Chun-Shi's words, one of them immediately twitched a few times. However, he was firmly bound in the air by an invisible force, so he could only barely shake his head. Cough! Cough! This person coughed heavily a few times, then slowly raised his head. His hair was messy, and his long hair covered half of his face, but it still did not cover his eyes that were filled with hatred. This person, it was actually Bai Hong. Bai Hong raised his head with great difficulty, and after looking deeply at Chen Shi, he said with a hoarse voice, "A soldier can be killed, but not humiliated. If you have the ability, just kill me." At this moment, Bai Hong looked very weak, like a prisoner who had not eaten for many days. If one looked closely, one could see that his body was full of thin golden needles, and he looked like a hedgehog. And this was obviously Chen Shi's masterpiece. After Chen Shi defeated the three people, he did not directly kill them, but used a secret technique to imprison them here. The densely packed golden needles on Bai Hong's body were the legendary spirit needles and spirit-piercing needles. As long as one was hit by these needles, the immortal cultivator would not be able to make the yuanying come out of the body, and the soul would be completely imprisoned in the body. "I don't have the ability." After hearing Bai Hong's words, Chen Shi smiled and waved at him, then went to the ice block that Shui Xiang had turned into and looked carefully. After confirming that Shui Xiang would not wake up in a short time, Chen Shi turned to Bai Hong and continued, "Do you know why I didn't kill you?" Bai Hong did not reply. Seeing this, Chen Shi smiled lightly and continued, "The reason why I didn't kill you is because I don't want to kill indiscriminately. I just wanted to ask you a few simple questions, but you didn't cooperate at all. Could it be?" Chapter 319. Bai Hong lowered his head and didn't speak, but the anger in his eyes never extinguished. With his current appearance, he looked a bit like a loyal minister who was wrongly imprisoned in ancient times. At this moment, he was being hung on a city wall by the traitor Chen Shi as a warning to others. Chen Shi stood on the ground and looked at Bai Hong silently. After waiting for a long time and not waiting for Bai Hong's reply, Chen Shi couldn't help but sneer and said again, "I don't know if you have a secret method called soul snatching." Speaking of this, Chen Shi deliberately paused. After taking a deep look at Bai Hong, he chuckled and said, "This secret method has the miraculous effect of exploring other people's memories. The conditions for using it are very simple, as long as the other party loses the ability to resist. However, although this secret method is good, it has a great flaw. That is, it will bring some sequelae to the person who is to be used, while a light case of Qigong deviation, a heavy case of the soul dispersing. There are three people here, so who do you think is more suitable to use this secret method on?" Chen Shi's voice sounded like it came from the Nine Serenities, giving people a gloomy feeling. And the moment Bai Hong heard the words soul snatching, his body couldn't help but tremble violently, not because of fear, but because of anger. Despicable. After squeezing out such a word from the gap of his teeth, Bai Hong raised his head and growled word by word, "Let me tell you, if I ever get away, I will definitely cut you into pieces." "Very good, very good." Chen Shi chuckled a few times, and after pretending to clap twice, he didn't talk nonsense, but directly took out the soul crystal from his arms. His divine soul injury had not healed yet. Bai Hong and the others were in a high realm, so for safety reasons, Chen Shi naturally needed the help of the soul crystal when using this secret method of soul searching. However, the moment Chen Shi took out the soul crystal, Bai Hong's face suddenly changed, and he asked anxiously, "Why do you have Gui Yao's mysterious crystal?" "Gui Yao? Black crystal?" After glancing at the soul crystal in his hand in puzzlement, Chen Shi asked thoughtfully, "Since you recognize this thing, why don't we have a good chat?" Bai Hong seemed to want to know where Chen Shi got this soul crystal from. After a moment of hesitation, he asked, "This mysterious crystal, where did you get it?" "The Siachen Glacier. Yes, a place 5,000 meters above sea level." "Where?" Bai Hong didn't know where the Siachen Glacier was, nor did she understand what Chen Shi meant by the altitude. Left with no choice, Chen Shi could only ponder for a while before asking, "Karakoram, do you know this place?" "Kunlun." The moment she heard this term, Bai Hong's eyes couldn't help but widen. It was obvious that he knew about Kunlun. Chen Shi noticed this detail, so he wisely shut his mouth and kept looking at Bai Hong. The expression on Bai Hong's face was a little uncertain. He knew what Chen Shi meant, so after hesitating for a while, he let out a deep breath and said hatefully, "Fine, what you want to know isn't some secret that can't be told. It's not a big deal to tell you. Later, in Bai Hong's slow narration, Chun-Shi finally learned some secrets about the ancient times. A long, long time ago, the earth was indeed a cultivation holy land similar to the Tianxian domain. So many cultivation inheritances were born. But one day, the spirit of heaven and earth on the earth began to weaken and dry up for no reason. If the spirit of heaven and earth was compared to a water source, then the cultivators were the fish in the water. Once the water source was lost, the fish would naturally go extinct. The cultivators on the earth obviously couldn't sit still and wait for death. Therefore, leaving the earth to find a place to cultivate became the common goal of everyone. The universe was vast and boundless. It was full of opportunities and hidden dangers. There was definitely more than one cultivation holy land. If one wanted to go from one cultivation holy land to another, not to mention whether there was a map navigation, even if there was a map navigation, could one really get there smoothly? Chun-Shi was able to smoothly return to the earth from the Tianxian domain. The hardships he had to go through were not something ordinary people could bear. Moreover, to fly across galaxies, one would need to be at least at the soul formation stage. How many soul formation stage cultivators could there be on Earth? This was related to the problem of whether the cultivation inheritances on Earth could continue to be passed down. Therefore, the cultivators of the ancient times put aside their prejudices and united to find a way to pass down their inheritances. Heaven would not let down those who work hard. Under the leadership of the most powerful cultivator of the ancient times, the Tai Ching's sacred master, the ancient cultivators finally found a way to survive, and that was a great world that existed in the void. A great world was similar to a small grotto heaven. If explained from a modern scientific point of view, it was somewhat similar to the concept of a dimensional space. If the universe Chun-Shi was in was compared to a bedroom, then the great world was the closet in the bedroom. It was closely connected to the universe, but it was a closed space of its own. And this was the so-called Great World. The only difference between a great world and a small grotto heaven was that the former was naturally formed and existed in the space cracks of the vast universe, while the latter could be opened manually. Of course, the scale, size, and stability of the two could not be compared. The Great World was discovered by the Tai Ching's sacred master when he was looking for a cultivation holy land in the universe. After he brought the news back to Earth, he united all the cultivators on Earth and gathered everyone's strength to open a passage directly from Earth to the Great World in the void. And this passage was also called by the later generations the Gate of Heaven. This information seemed very important to Chun-Shi, but it was a historical event that everyone in the Great World knew. Therefore, Bai Hong had no intention of hiding it at all. Soon, she told Chun-Shi about the origin of the Gate of Heaven. This was also the information that Chun-Shi wanted to know the most. Therefore, after Bai Hong finished speaking, she looked at Chun-Shi, ready to listen to him talk about the origin of the soul crystal. Without any discussion, the two of them reached a tacit agreement. This was a very good start. Therefore, Chun-Shi told Bai Hong about the origin of the soul crystal and the Temple of Time in detail. He deliberately spoke in detail, paying attention to the changes in Bai Hong's expression during the process. When Chun-Shi said that he had destroyed the soul of the Azure Dragon in the Great Hall, he keenly noticed that Bai Hong's pupils suddenly contracted. There was something fishy. Chun-Shi looked deeply at Bai Hong. After telling the story about the soul crystal, it was his turn to ask again. Chapter 320. What was the sundial? Chun-Shi raised his question, but Bai Hong did not answer immediately. He looked at the soul crystal in Chun-Shi's hand and was silent for a long time before he answered slowly. Back then, after the Tai Ching's sacred master led everyone to the Great World, he left 5 sacred temples in the lower realm. One of them was the sundial. Although the Great World was self-contained, it was still a spatial crack in the depths of the void. It was just that this crack was larger and more stable than an ordinary small grotto heaven. But it was a pity, although the Great World was good, it was far from being as stable as the main world. It might suddenly close one day and imprison the ancient cultivators in the void forever. Therefore, the Tai Ching's sacred master left 5 sacred temples on Earth. These 5 sacred temples used the soul crystal as the core to suppress 5 ancient ferocious beasts and use their powerful souls as the coordinates to communicate between the 2 realms. As long as the souls of the ferocious beasts in the 5 sacred temples were not destroyed, even if the spatial cracks suddenly closed and trapped the ancient cultivators in the void, they could still find the main world through the souls of these 5 ferocious beasts and forcefully open a passage back to the main world. The remnant soul of the Azure Dragon that she had encountered before was an ancient ferocious beast suppressed by the Sundial Temple. Because of a nourishment of the soul crystal, the Azure Dragon's soul had not dissipated after so many years. The Azure Dragon was an ancient ferocious beast. In terms of intelligence, it was not inferior to the ancient cultivators. But it was also because it was an intelligent creature that the moment Chun-Shi opened the seal, the Azure Dragon attacked Chun-Shi crazily and tried to occupy his body. After all, it had been imprisoned for a very long time, and its desire for freedom had long been ingrained in its bones. Now that it finally saw the hope of escape, it naturally would not let it go. But the Azure Dragon never expected that what it had waited for with great difficulty was not freedom, but the tragic fate of having its soul destroyed. The Sundial Temple was like a signal tower connecting the 2 realms. Once the Azure Dragon's remnant soul was destroyed, the ancient cultivators in the great world naturally could no longer sense the existence of the Sundial Temple. Therefore, they sent Bai Hong and the others to investigate the situation and also to see where Changli had gone and why he had not returned. At the mention of Changli, Bai Hong immediately frowned deeply. Gue Yao was destroyed, Changli's fate was unknown, and now even the 3 of them had fallen into the hands of this person, completely reduced to prisoners. Everything was the work of this mysterious man in front of him. When did such an expert appear in the lower realm? Thinking of this, Bai Hong couldn't help but take a deep look at Chun-Shi before asking her second question. Who are you? His question was very general, so Chun-Shi immediately replied with a smile. Me? My name is Chun-Shi. I'm from Zhonghai, and I'm currently living in Shangjing. I'm unemployed, and I own a tea house. I spend most of my time at home with my wife and kids. Bai Hong wasn't a fool. This perfunctory answer naturally wouldn't satisfy him. Therefore, he immediately interrupted Chun-Shi and said angrily, "Don't try to trick me. With the cultivation conditions of the lower realms, it's impossible for an existence of your level to appear. Who are you? Why do you want to be our enemy?" Bai Hong seemed to be very concerned about this question. Seeing this, Chun-Shi spread out his hands innocently and replied seriously, "Why would I lie to you? I'm really a native of Earth. Yes, Earth is the lower realm you mentioned. I've always been in the lower realm, so I don't know anything about your world. Otherwise, why would I waste my time asking you these simple questions?" These words were reasonable, and for a moment, Bai Hong didn't know how to continue asking. Yes, if Chun-Shi also came from the lower realm, then why didn't he know the history that everyone knew? Bai Hong secretly tried to figure out Chun-Shi's background. Chun-Shi waited for a while. Seeing that Bai Hong didn't speak, he asked with a smile, "Okay, now it's my turn to ask questions?" Bai Hong didn't answer. Seeing this, Chun-Shi continued asking, "Let's talk about the lower realm. I'm very curious about the situation inside." As he spoke, he gently rubbed the soul crystal in his hand with his finger. This action seemed to be a silent warning to Bai Hong that if he still didn't speak, he would use force. In fact, the reason why Chun-Shi took the trouble to ask and didn't directly use the secret technique to search his soul was mainly because his soul injury had not healed. After all, Bai Hong and the others were not weak and their souls were intact. If they also happened to practice some kind of secret technique that strengthened their souls, then Chun-Shi would very likely suffer a backlash in the process of casting the technique and go crazy. Chun-Shi now had the upper hand and had plenty of ways to make Bai Hong talk. Naturally, he wouldn't take the risk so easily. It was better to be safe than sorry. Chun-Shi had a deep understanding of this. Looking at the glimmering light on the soul crystal, an indescribable feeling suddenly appeared in Bai Hong's eyes. After exhaling deeply, he looked at Chun Shi and slowly said, "The lower realm? That's a place that's close to paradise." The lower realm was located in a void crack in the depths of the universe and was connected to Earth through the gate of heaven. Therefore, even if Earth's spirit Qi was exhausted, the lower realm still had rich spirit Qi of heaven and earth. As the ancient cultivators came to the lower realm one after another, the grand pure divine ancestors' fame and prestige reached its peak. If one wanted to make an enemy of the grand pure divine ancestor, they had to be mentally prepared to make an enemy of the entire lower realm. Therefore, the Grand Pure One relied on his supreme power to turn the tide and support the building that was about to collapse to successfully do something that no one before him had ever done before. And that was, he combined the originally scattered and independent cultivator legacies and successfully created an organization called Celestial Capital in the lower realm. The appearance of Celestial Capital was like Qin Shi Huang sweeping through the Six Nations and unifying the world. Under the intentional push of the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, the various sects and clans put down their prejudices and learned from each other. They learned from each other and learned from each other. Everyone obtained the benefits they wanted, and Tiandu ushered in its most glorious moment. But it was a pity that this glory didn't last forever. The path to immortality was difficult as ascending to the blue sky. Even a stunning and unparalleled existence like the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor was unable to break free from the shackles of the heavenly Tao in the end. As a result, his lifespan ran out and he passed away with regret. With the passing of the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, Celestial Capital's strength also weakened rapidly and was no longer as glorious as before. However, as the saying goes, a dead camel is bigger than a horse, and a rotten ship still has 3 caddies of iron. Although Celestial Capital was no longer as glorious as before with the assets left behind by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, Celestial Capital was still the strongest force in the lower realm. As the Divine General of Celestial Capital, Bai Hong naturally could not tell Chun Shi all the details of Celestial Capital, so after a brief introduction of the origin of Celestial Capital, he closed his mouth again. In this regard, Chun Shi had no intention of continuing to ask, because he had roughly guessed the current situation of Celestial Capital. The reason was very simple. The world was as black as the crows. In order to survive, cultivators had to strengthen themselves through plundering. If the immortal cultivators were regarded as animals, then from the perspective of such a selfish ethnic style, to create a country or organization with a centralized system similar to that of Heavenly Capital, that was simply an impossible thing. After all, as consumers at the top of the food chain, cultivators could strengthen the overall strength of the clan after forming an organization, but they did not have enough resources to maintain the operation of the organization. It was precisely because of this that cultivators had always established relationships with each other in the form of clans and sects, and could only huddle together in a small area for warmth. In the end, it was all because of those simple 8 words: natural selection, survival of the fittest. Chapter 321. The Great World. Tiandu, the Tai Ching Sacred Leader. Although Bai Hong deliberately concealed a lot of important information, it didn't stop Chun Shi from making a reasonable analysis. Thus, when he connected all the information he already knew together, a clear picture suddenly appeared in his mind. First of all, he could confirm that Earth was originally a cultivation holy land similar to Tianxian. However, on a certain day, a long time ago, Earth spirit Qi suddenly declined. In order to survive, the ancient cultivators entered the great world under the lead of the Tai Ching Sacred Leader. The so-called Heavenly Gate was actually a passage connecting the 2 realms. The Tai Ching Sacred Leader gathered everyone's strength to open the Heavenly Gate to the great world. Then, he left 5 sacred temples on Earth to maintain the connection between the two realms. Although the ancient cultivators had left, they had left behind some incomplete inheritances on Earth. Thus, the ordinary people left on Earth evolved all kinds of cultivation methods based on these legacies, such as necromancers, martial artists, yin-yang masters, and so on. However, it was a pity that the cultivation environment on Earth was so bad, and because the legacies were incomplete, the celestial realm became the limit that the cultivators on Earth could reach. At this time, the group of celestials trapped on Earth naturally began to think of ways to continue to break through, just like their ancestors had done. Later on, they should have found a way to communicate with the great world, so there were many legends about the heavenly gate in this world. Once the heavenly gate was opened, one could ascend. However, they didn't know that the opening of the heavenly gate was not controlled by the ancient cultivators. The Tai Ching's sacred leader gathered everyone's strength to forcibly open a passage to the great world. Why would he open it again for 1 or 2 celestial realm juniors? The reason why the heavenly gate was so difficult to open was mainly because the spirit chi of the two realms was too different. Here was an example. If the great world was a sealed pressure cooker, then the heavenly gate was the lid. Because the spirit chi in the great world was much denser than on Earth, there was a strong pressure difference between the two sides of the heavenly gate. In the face of such a strong pressure, if one wanted to open the lid with violence, it would be equivalent to bearing the impact of the entire great world's spirit chi alone. In this situation, not to mention insightful emptiness, even an immortal emperor would find it difficult. Since it was impossible to open it by force, some ingenious methods were needed. A portion of the gas was discharged through the vent to reduce the pressure in the pressure cooker. When the pressure inside the cooker was about the same as the pressure outside, the lid could be opened easily. However, the great world was not a pressure cooker, and there was no vent on the divine gate, so they could only use the second method. That was, by increasing the air pressure in the outside world, the air pressure between the two worlds would be the same. Then, it would be easy to open the lid. It sounded simple, but in practice, it was exceptionally difficult. After all, if the spiritual chi on Earth could reach the level of the great world, why would the ancient cultivators leave their homes and hide in the great world? Therefore, every time the divine gate opened, it was actually the time when the spirit chi on Earth began to recover. Thinking of this, Chunshi finally understood the role of Xian-Nu. The great world used the spiritual souls of the ancient ferocious beasts to locate Earth. Similarly, the cultivators on Earth had to use the same method to locate the great world. With the depletion of spiritual chi, there were no more ancient ferocious beasts on Earth. Therefore, they could only settle for the next best thing, which was to use Xian-Nu's Yin Soul to maintain the connection between the two worlds. No one knew when the divine gate would open, so generations of Xian-Nus had been replaced until the generation of Qin Roying and Qin Xueching, Xian-Nu. At the thought of this, Chunxi's eyes instantly became much sharper. After all, this was an important issue related to Yingying's spiritual soul. He had already found Yingying's Yin Soul and taken care of those old bastards in the village. There shouldn't be any more problems, right? Chunxi thought seriously for a long time. In the end, he still felt a little uneasy, so he asked again, "By the way, do you know what Xian-Nu does?" Xian-Nu? Xian-Nu was not a product of the great world. Bai Hong had nothing to hide about this, so she asked straightforwardly, "You mean Simon Xian-Nu?" Simon Xian-Nu? After Chunxi repeated this name, he replied hesitantly, "I think so. Other than Simon Xian-Nu, I haven't heard of a similar name. If you want to ask about Simon Xian-Nu, then I'm sorry, I don't know much about it." This answer obviously did not satisfy Qin Shi, so he immediately frowned and asked, "Why? You came from the great world. Don't you need Xian-Nu to sense the location of Earth?" We have the Sun Glory Temple. Why do we need Simon Xian-Nu?" After hearing Bai Hong's matter-of-fact answer, She was stunned. That's right. Since the ancient immortal cultivators in the great world used the souls of ancient fierce beasts to maintain the coordinates of the two worlds, why did they need Xian-Nu's soul to guide them? Chun Shi stared at Bai Hong for a long time. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something. His figure flashed, and he appeared in front of Bai Hong out of thin air. Since Siming Xiannu and the Sun Glory Temple have the same function, that means the former is just a substitute for the latter. You just said that the Sun Glory Temple has been controlled by Tiandu since ancient times. Even if I accidentally destroyed the Sun Glory Temple, there should be 4 temples left that have the same function. So, I want to ask you to tell me, Siming Xiannu, and who is in control of it? Chun Shi floated in the air, at most 2 meters away from Bai Hong. He just looked at Bai Hong quietly, and Bai Hong also saw a dignified feeling in his eyes. Chun Shi was not stupid. The reason why this seemingly contradictory question appeared now was obviously because Bai Hong concealed some information that might involve Siming Xiannu towards Tiandu and even the entire Great World. Chun Shi had a curious attitude, so she did not delve into how much truth or falsehood Bai Hong's words had. However, when these questions began to involve Qin Ruoying, Chun Shi naturally had to change his way of communicating with Bai Hong. Although Bai Hong and Chun Shi had not met many times, it was the first time he saw Chun Shi so dignified, so he very wisely shut his mouth and was ready to answer after thinking about it. Because he also knew that if he continued to be perfunctory, the two of them might not be able to chat so happily anymore. Think carefully before answering. Chun Shi gave Bai Hong enough time to think. So, after a moment of silence, Bai Hong slowly said 2 words. Chapter 322. Attention to all bosses, a bug has appeared. The previous chapter has been modified. Chapter 321. The correct way to open the Divine Gate. Please review it. Please forgive us if we have caused you any inconvenience. Sorry, Arbiter of Fate Xiannu. The truth was just as Chun Shi thought. Arbiter of Fate Xiannu was indeed the guide for cultivators to ascend to the Great World. Through a secret technique, the elders placed Arbiter of Fate Xiannu's earthly soul into the soul mirror, thereby establishing a connection with the Great World. There were 2 sides to the soul mirror. One was in celestial capital, and the other was on Earth. Just like a wired telephone, Arbiter of Fate Xiannu's earthly soul was the most important telephone line. However, Xiannu herself was only a mortal. Therefore, when they became Xiannu, their earthly souls had to be at their most stable and strong. That is, between 10 and 30 years old. Just like an old saying, a person will pass noon after 30 days. Once a person's age exceeded 30, their body's various functions would gradually decline, and they would go downhill. The so-called Arbiter of Fate was the mandate of the heavens. According to the village's tradition, becoming Arbiter of Fate Xiannu was a very glorious and fortunate thing. However, only the elders knew, even after Arbiter of Fate Xiannu left office, the earthly soul would not be returned to them. The moment they became Arbiter of Fate Xiannu, they were destined to have 1 less soul than ordinary people. If one of the 3 souls was missing, they could not be considered a complete person. Therefore, every time Arbiter of Fate Xiannu left office, their bodies would suddenly become very weak, as if they had leukemia. They would be weak all over and fall sick easily. In addition, the effects of the soul recovery soup would gradually weaken, and the consequences of losing one of the 3 souls would gradually become apparent. Arbiter of Fate Xiannu usually did not live past 35 years old. It was also because of this that Qin Ruoying's mother died young. Of course, Arbiter of Fate Xiannu's function was obviously not limited to this. Through Bai Hong's explanation, Chun Shi was surprised to learn that the Arbiter of Fate Xiannu had another use, and that was, cultivators in the Great World could use the Arbiter of Fate Xiannu to check the condition of Earth's spiritual energy and selectively open the heavenly gates. Other than that, even Bai Hong wasn't sure if Siming Xiannu had any other secrets. As a result, after telling Chun Shi everything he knew, he said calmly, "That's all I know. If you still don't believe me, you can search my soul." Bai Hong's temperament was originally cold and arrogant. Now that she had become Chun-Chi's prisoner and had unwillingly confessed some things under his interrogation, she naturally felt very uncomfortable in her heart. What's more, even if he told the truth, Chun-Chi still had a suspicious look on his face. Bai Hong was naturally unwilling to say anything more. It was merely a soul-searching. What did he have to fear? Seeing this, Chun-Chi didn't force her anymore. After seriously considering the truth of Bai Hong's words, Chun-Chi turned and flew back to the ground. It's getting late. Let's call it a day. After landing, Chun-Chi waved at Bai Hong without looking back, then walked straight out of the cave. Anyway, there were still many days ahead. He had plenty of time to slowly chat with Bai Hong. However, just as Chun-Chi was about to step into the pool, Bai Hong suddenly called out to him. Wait! Her voice was very weak. However, Chun-Chi's ears were very sharp. He immediately stopped in his tracks and turned around to look at her. Is there anything else? Chun-Chi waited for a while, but Bai Hong didn't say anything. For a moment, the deep cave was so quiet that not even the sound of breathing could be heard. After an unknown amount of time, Bai Hong's voice slowly rang out from the darkness. If we calculate according to the time in the lower realm, the divine gate will open again in a month at most, including Chongli, for divine generals of Tiandu have already fallen in your hands, so it's impossible to ignore it like before. If you let us go now, I can promise to let bygones be bygones and pretend that these things never happened. Otherwise, what you will face might be even more terrifying than you think. Hearing this, Chun-Chi's lips suddenly curved into a slight smile. However, he didn't say anything harsh. As if he was saying goodbye to an old friend of many years, he waved casually at Bai Hong and jumped directly into the pool. They were all adults. Didn't they know what was right and what was wrong? If they didn't have some skills, would Chun-Chi deal with them like this? Naive. It was getting late, so after Chun-Chi left the cave, he prepared to go to the Siachen Glacier to pick up Ying from the Sundial Brilliance Temple. But when he traveled on the seabed for a while and was about to fly to the shallow sea area, he suddenly sensed a faint fluctuation of spiritual energy around him. Out of caution, Chun-Chi followed this fluctuation of spiritual energy and carefully searched the seabed. This was the deep sea where even the sun couldn't shine. Being in it gave people a feeling of being in the universe. Chun-Chi lit up a light ball. Suddenly, a colorful fantasy world appeared in front of him. Fish of all shapes and colors moved freely on the seabed. In addition to fish, there were all kinds of shellfish, starfish, corals, and seaweed dancing in the waves. Faced with this dreamlike underwater world, the first reaction in Chun-Chi's mind was, Yin should also like this place, right? Why not take advantage of her birthday and take her on a day trip under the sea? Chun-Chi seriously considered the feasibility of this idea. Chapter 3:23. A fish that had awakened its intelligence. Obviously, this fish was like the big cat. Because it encountered some kind of opportunity, it opened its own path of cultivation. However, the big cat's original form was a leopard. Leopards were at the top of the food chain. Therefore, before they gained intelligence, the big cat's chances of survival were naturally much higher than the fish in front of him. It was just a small fish, not a shark or a whale. Could it overturn rivers and seas? Fish were like rabbits, weak and timid. Even the slightest movement could frighten them. Not to mention that this was a fish with intelligence comparable to that of a human. Therefore, when the fish realized that Chun-Chi had found it, it quickly drilled into the coral reef, wanting to hide as far away from this human as possible. But regrettably, the person it encountered today was not those diving enthusiasts who wore swimsuits and carried oxygen tanks, but immortal cultivators who protected their bodies with vital energy. Even if they were in the water, they were like birds soaring in the sky. The coral reef in front of him was very lush. It was as difficult as looking for a needle in a haystack to find this living fish. But fortunately, Chun-Chi was no longer the same as before. After this period of recovery, his soul injury had recovered a little, and the range of his divine sense had naturally increased a lot. Therefore, Chun-Chi with the help of the soul crystal, allowed his divine sense to cover more than half of the trench in an instant. Wherever his divine sense went, even if it was a drop in the ocean, Chun-Shi could see it all. Then, Chun-Shi found the fish in the deepest part of the coral reef. At this time, he finally saw the fish's appearance. This was a typical deep-sea fish, so its appearance was very different from river fish and shallow-sea fish. Because it lived in the dark seabed all year round, the characteristics of deep-sea fish were usually a big mouth, big eyes, and a certain part of its body had a light-emitting device. Through the light-emitting device, they could emit light to lure prey, and at the same time, attract mates and reproduce. Most of the deep-sea fish had strange shapes, and Chun-Shi had not deliberately studied the species of deep-sea fish. But when he saw the fish's appearance clearly, the name of this fish appeared in his mind in an instant, and that was anglerfish. The name sounded complicated, but in fact it referred to the kind of fish with a lantern on its head. It was also because of the lantern on its head that this fish was often called the anglerfish. There were many species of anglerfish, most of which were very ugly and even a little scary. But the one in front of Chun-Shi was different. Perhaps it was because it was an immortal, so this anglerfish did not look ugly. Instead, it gave people a feeling of stupidity and cute. Looking at it carefully, it was a fish of the Asian anglerfish. Unlike an anglerfish's body had it had a layer of golden scales on its body, looked like the protagonist of the clownfish in Finding Nemo. Its body was as fat as a basketball, and it had a lantern on its head. Looking at its silly appearance and its timid little eyes, so Chun-Shi made a decision in an instant, and that was to catch it and bring it back to Nyin as a pet. As for fish, although it could not be held in the hand to play with at all times, it could be placed in the fish tank for viewing. Thinking of this, Chun-Shi smiled and flew over the coral reef where the fish was. This unlucky anglerfish hid timidly in the coral reef, and probably would never understand. Why was he so unlucky? In the courtyard, when a little girl was awakened by a burst of clatter noise, she lay by the window with a dull look in her eyes. In the courtyard, several workers were moving a huge fish tank to the steps of the west wing under Chun-Shi's command. "Mama, what are they doing?" After looking for a while, the little girl rubbed her eyes and then obediently went to the bathroom under Qin Ruoying's lead. "Daddy bought you a fish, so we have to put a fish tank at home to raise fish," Qin Ruoying explained with a smile. But this little thing seemed to have misunderstood, so she pouted and muttered softly, "I don't like to eat fish of bones." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying was a little dumbfounded. She pinched her little face and explained, "This fish is not for eating." "Not for eating? Then what is it for?" "For you to see." "I don't want to see. I don't like fish." Because fish had bones, she didn't like to eat fish, and then she didn't like this kind of animal. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying didn't say anything more to her. Anyway, she would be able to see the fish in a while. After the little girl finished her breakfast under Qin Ruoying's care, she carried the big cat and stepped out of the west wing door. When Chun-Shi saw her coming out, he shouted for her to come to his side. "Nyin, come. Daddy bought you a new pet. Do you like it?" As he said that, Chun-Shi carried her to the fish tank. This fish tank was 3 to 4 meters long, and placed on the steps of the west wing. It almost blocked the wall. However, when the little fellow saw the dull gray stones and the strangely shaped corals, it shook its head with a stupefied expression. It was obvious that her heart didn't waver. Seeing this, Chun-Shi immediately put his right hand on the panel on the side of the fish tank, and then said to her mysteriously, "Dang, dang, dang. It's time to witness a miracle." After saying that, Chun-Shi pressed the light switch of the fish tank. Because of the refraction of light, a fish tank without lights and a fish tank with lights on were simply two different things. Therefore, the moment the light was turned on, the little thing's eyes suddenly lit up. Corals, shells, and seaweed, these things that came from the sea under the illumination of the lights, suddenly presented a dreamy beauty. "Oh, it's so beautiful." Seeing that the fish tank was so beautiful, the little girl suddenly cried out happily. The guests entered, but the protagonist didn't appear for a long time. Therefore, Chun-Shi patted the fish tank and quietly released a stream of vital essence. At this time, the silly anteater was like a cat whose tail was stepped on and suddenly came out of the coral cave. "Papa, fish, look, it has a lantern on its head." After seeing the silly anteater, the little girl was immediately attracted by the lantern on its head. She was already very excited, but the big cat in her arms was even more excited. The moment the anteater appeared, the big cat jumped out of the little girl's arms directly to the top of the fish tank, and then stretched out its claws to catch the fish. What was happiness? Happiness was when cats ate fish, dogs ate meat, and Ultraman beat up small monsters. The big cat also noticed that the fish was not simple, so it wanted to weigh how much it weighed. However, at the moment it stretched out its claws, Chun-Shi grabbed its neck and then brought it in front of him and said to it word by word, "I'm warning you, don't touch it. If I find out that you ate it, tell me, do you like steamed or braised?" Hearing this, the big cat suddenly shook its head excitedly. Perhaps it was because it was too excited, its body was trembling slightly. Chapter 324. With the appearance of the fish tank, the huge courtyard finally had one more permanent resident. This anglerfish's head was very big, so when the little guy asked what it should be called, Chun-Shi decisively gave it a name: Big Head. It was especially vivid and vivid. At the same time, it sounded like it complemented the two words big cat, big head, because her vocabulary was too small. After the little one whispered the name in her mouth, she said with a happy face, "Big Head sounds good. This is Big Cat, this is Big Head. Fish, fish, you'll be called Big Head from now on. Okay?" Big Head was a deep-sea fish and had never been in contact with humans, so it naturally didn't understand what the little one was saying. However, although it didn't understand what the little one was saying, the big cat next to it understood. So, it immediately rolled its eyes in a very human-like way. It was obviously a cat, but its eyes revealed a very disdainful feeling. Such a proud performance in the eyes of Chun, she naturally couldn't avoid giving it a slap after settling Big Head. The family of three faced the late spring sun and leisurely walked out of the tea house. After not coming back for 2 months, a light layer of dust had already accumulated in the tea house. The couple rolled up their sleeves and began to clean. As for the little girl, she slipped into her own children's playground and happily played with building blocks by herself. However, she didn't play for long before there was a sudden burst of shouting outside the tea house. "Nyen Nyen, Nyen Nyen, we're here." After not seeing each other for a long time, the two brothers were not polite at all. After each of them pushed open a glass door, the two brothers jumped into the tea house side by side. Gu Lao thought that the two brothers would wait for the old man to enter before letting go. He didn't expect that, just as he walked to the door, the glass door had already bounced back and almost hit him in the face. This troublesome child, seeing this, Gu Lao helplessly shook his head, then opened the door and greeted Chun-Shi and his wife. As usual, after making a pot of tea, Chun-Shi played Go with the old man. The three little things were making a ruckus in the children's playground. Qin Ruoying turned on the stereo and played some soothing light music. Then, she picked up a book called Collection of Flowers and sat in the booth next to the children's playground. In this warm spring season, this small tea house hidden in the corner of Hohai had a kind of leisurely and carefree atmosphere. At the same time, it was relaxed and lively. Unfortunately, although the tea house was good, it rarely had customers. Today was not the weekend, so it was not until Gu Lao brought the two brothers home for lunch that the door of the tea house was finally pushed open. He was still not a guest. The little fellow looked up. Wasn't this person Xiao Yuan, whom he hadn't seen for a long time? She didn't contact Chun-Shi in advance, but she didn't expect that she would coincidentally rush over on the first day of the tea house's opening. If I remember correctly, Beijing Normal University is not that close to Hohai, right? Why did she just happen to wander over? Boss, Xiao Yuan had just walked into the tea house when she looked up and saw Chun Shi and his family sitting around a tea table preparing to eat. Therefore, she immediately lowered her head in embarrassment. She felt like she was here to freeload. "Sister, you're here. Let's eat. Come, come." The little fellow waved the chopsticks in his hand and shouted excitedly. In fact, since the end of the winter vacation, Xiao Yuan would visit Hohai every day. She wanted to come over and help when the tea house opened. She didn't know why she liked to come here. Repaying kindness was only one reason. On the other hand, it was probably because of the boss family of 3. Although the boss didn't look much older than her, he always gave people the feeling that he had seen the world. Coupled with the knowledgeable and virtuous lady boss, as well as the lively and cute little guy, Xiao Yuan always wanted to follow them around and learn from them in detail. This was not homework, nor was it work. It was an attitude towards life. As the saying goes, one is marked by the company one keeps. Birds of a feather flock together. Xiao Yuan felt that she might have met the light in her life. Unknowingly, she was influenced by the husband and wife, which caused her to have a change from the inside out. This change wasn't obvious, but hidden. Perhaps it would be many years later that she would truly realize what she had learned as a waitress here. Although the tea house didn't need to hire waiters, Chun-Shi obviously couldn't just chase them away. Therefore, after Xiao Yuan repeatedly promised that she wouldn't fall behind in her homework, Chun-Shi finally gave her the keys to the tea house. From now on, she would be the shopkeeper here. An ordinary and leisurely day passed just like that. Xiao Yuan took some time to go to school to get her suitcase. Then, she once again moved into the courtyard. As soon as she stepped through the drooping flower gate, she saw the huge fish tank and the big cat that was lying on top of the fish tank and kept meowing into the tank. Every time the big cat meowed, Big Head would immediately spit out a series of bubbles, as if it was responding to it. The fish and the cat were communicating in a way that was completely incomprehensible to humans. Is this an anglerfish? The moment she saw the fish, such a question appeared in Xiao Yuan's mind. If she remembered correctly, the anglerfish should not have scales, right? This fish, what kind of fish was it? Why did it feel a little strange? Although Xiao Yuan felt that it was a little strange, she didn't ask much. She had already made up her mind to follow the boss in the future. She would see more, learn more, and do more. Although she was only a waitress in the tea house, when she held the keys to the tea house, a fighting spirit ignited in her heart for no reason. The peaceful and indifferent life kept repeating itself. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, it was summer. This morning, while the little girl was feeding the fish, Chun-Shi quietly came to her side and then asked mysteriously, "Nian Nian, come. Daddy wants to ask you a question. Do you know what day it is tomorrow?" Hearing this, the little girl tilted her head and thought for a while. But after thinking for a long time, she still couldn't think of a reason, so she shook her head blankly. "Think again." Chun-Shi asked again, but the little girl shook her head again. Chun-Shi had no choice but to cough lightly and remind her, "Today is May 5th. Hearing this, the little girl still didn't seem to react, and the expression on her face looked very cute. Chun-Shi was silent. Then he suddenly raised both hands like a child and shouted very exaggeratedly, "Today is your birthday? Are you happy?" "Birthday?" The little girl was obviously stunned, but then, as if nothing had happened, she turned around and continued to throw minced meat into the fish tank. Big Head opened its bloody mouth. Every time it swallowed a piece of minced meat, it happily turned around in the water. And the big cat was lying on the side, and from time to time, it would poke its head out to snatch a piece of meat to eat. This behavior made Big Head so angry that it kept bubbling in its mouth. This scene made Chun-Shi stunned. Strange. Nian-Nian's reaction was not right, but after thinking about it, Chun-Shi understood what was going on with the little girl. Chapter 325. Chun-Shi had discussed with Qin Ruoying for a long time about how to arrange Nian-Nian's birthday. On her birthday, he would take her to fly in the sky, travel the 4 seas, look at the land of the divine land, and see all the beautiful scenery. Although the idea was quite tempting, after some consideration, Chun-Shi finally decided to let Nian Nian live a normal childhood. After all, this was not the Tianyuan world, and Nian Nian would have to go to school in the future. If he really let her come into contact with the world of immortal cultivators in advance, then when other children were talking about toys and cartoons, wouldn't Nian Nian be talking about how high and how deep the sea was? Let me tell you a secret. Actually, my papa is Superman. He is invulnerable and can fly. When he thought that Nian Nian might use such a proud tone to show off to her classmates in the future, Chun-Shi couldn't help but imagine their reactions. Ridicule was inevitable. Children nowadays were very precocious, and they already knew a lot of things when they were just a few years old. Many children thought that their father was Superman, but reality would always teach them a lesson. How could there be Superman in this world? So they would turn to ridicule those children who always thought that their father was Superman. If your father is so powerful, why don't you save the world? But the more they ridiculed her, the angrier Nian Nian would be, and then she would want to prove that she wasn't lying. After all, she knew that her father could really fly. Nian Nian wasn't lying, but who would believe such a thing that sounded like a fantasy story? Other people's fathers couldn't fly. Why could your father fly? From the moment she said that her father was Superman, Nian Nian was no longer sociable, so everyone only ridiculed her even more. She said that her father is Superman. Do you believe it? I don't believe it. She must be bragging. Mom said not to play with bragging children. We have to stay away from her. Bragging king, bah. Of course, Chun-Shi didn't want to see such a thing happen, so after much consideration, he decided to arrange an ordinary and happy birthday for Nian Nian. Even if he didn't take her to fly, Chun-Shi believed this day would be the best memory of Nian Nian's life. Therefore, after Chun-Shi comforted Nian Nian's inexplicable emotions, the family of three set off directly. They didn't bring the big cat, nor did they call the twins, because all the activities today, only him and Ying were needed. After Chun-Shi got into the taxi with Nian Nian in her arms, the little guy's mood was obviously relieved, so she nestled in his arms and asked softly, "Papa, where are we going?" As she spoke, she looked at Chun-Shi with her big, cute eyes. Needless to say, her small eyes were naturally filled with anticipation and desire. Thus, she was like a spider demon that had just eaten her fill. She sprawled out on the climbing net like that. Seeing this, the couple sat on the grass under the shade of the trees and kept cheering for her. The little fellow rested for a while, and then crawled up, huffing and puffing. When she finally climbed to another big tree and slid down the tree slide, she waved her small hands and threw herself into Qin Ruoying's arms. "Mama, good fun, I want to play." Qin Ruoying saw her panting and was ready to pull her to sit next to her. But she didn't expect. After the little guy finished drinking the water, he suddenly broke free from her arms and ran back to the starting point, ready to play again. This child, seeing this, Qin Ruoying could only shake her head slightly. Since it was a children's paradise, the child's safety was obviously fully guaranteed. So the couple sat aside and cheered the little girl up from time to time, so that she could play more happily. It wasn't that Nian Nian hadn't used these facilities before, but she still had a lot of fun today. Therefore, when Chun-Shi asked her if she had a good time today, the little girl suddenly nodded her head like a chicken pecking at rice. It was good that she was happy. Only when she was happy, it was considered a birthday. Since it was a birthday, naturally, there was a birthday cake. So, after the little girl had played to her heart's content, Chun-Shi took her to the park's self-service barbecue area. After making a sumptuous barbecue meal for her, Chun-Shi clapped his hands and signaled the staff next to him to push the cake up. As the cake entered, the band that Chun-Shi had arranged in advance immediately came to the little girl's side and played a birthday song for her. It wasn't that the park had never held a birthday party before, but it was really the first time that a birthday party was more grand than a marriage proposal for a child's birthday. Therefore, the area where Chun-Shi's family was immediately surrounded by tourists who were watching the fun. Accompanied by the band's performance, the onlookers, led by Chun-Shi and Qin Ring, sang the birthday song together loudly. Happy birthday to you, 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 healthy birthday to you, have a warm family. Nyin yin, happy birthday? When had the little girl ever seen such a scene? So, she was stunned on the spot. Until Chun-Shi pushed the cake in front of her, the little girl didn't seem to come back to her senses. Seeing this, Chun-Shi squatted beside her and said softly, Nyin yin, happy birthday, come, blow out the candles, and you can make a wish. Any wish is fine. Chapter 326. Birthday Wish. Looking at the crowd of onlookers, the little girl couldn't help but feel a little dazed, so she timidly grabbed Chun-Shi's arm. She looked like she had stage fright. In fact, Aunt Zhang had celebrated her birthday before, but she had never mentioned anything about birthday wishes. After all, she was old and naturally did not know much about foreign culture. In the past, her family was poor. A red egg and a bowl of longevity noodles were the best birthday gift for children. As for birthday cakes, in Aunt Zhang's eyes, those were just snacks that children like to eat. Since Ninian liked them, she would buy them for her. Therefore, Aunt Zhang did not have any concept of making a birthday wish on her birthday, so she had never arranged for it for her. Ninian, what birthday wish do you have? Today is your birthday, so you just have to make a wish now. After you blow out the candles, your wish will come true. Chun-Shi hugged the little girl and explained patiently in her ear. The little girl curled up in Chun-Shi's arms. After looking up at Chun-Shi, she pouted and shook her head, as if she could not think of anything she wanted. Seeing this, Chun-Shi tried to guide her. Nyin, you can only make a birthday wish once a year. Don't you have anything in particular that you want? For example, if you want to eat something, play something, or go somewhere, you can tell me now. Daddy promises to satisfy you. Hearing this, the little girl seemed to finally understand the concept of birthday wish. Therefore, she pouted and asked hesitantly, Can I really make anything come true? Ahem. This question made Chun-Shi pause for a moment. At this point, if the little girl made a wish but could not make it come true, wouldn't she be very disappointed? After all, this was the first time she made a birthday wish. She was a little hesitant about whether to make a promise. However, on second thought, she was just a 5-year-old child. Could she make a wish that was so difficult to make? Therefore, he answered with certainty, Yes, Father can promise you that no matter what you wish for, it will come true. When he said this, Chun-Shi's tone was particularly solemn, which made Qin Roing, who was beside him, couldn't help but glance at him. This sentence was, what about the father's promise to his daughter? The little fellow didn't feel anything special, so when she heard Chun-Shi's reply, she smiled happily and said, Okay, then I have a wish. With that said, under the guidance of Chun-Shi, she stood on the bench facing the cake. Then, she put her hands together, closed her eyes, and prepared to make a wish. Looking at her serious face, the crowd immediately quieted down, afraid to disturb this cute little girl. She didn't think for long before she suddenly opened her eyes and said excitedly, My wish is Papa and Mama have to stay by my side forever. After that, the little thing puffed up its little mouth and tried its best to blow out all 5 candles on the cake. A child mind was not so complicated. She said what she thought. However, it was such a simple and somewhat unrealistic wish that directly displayed the thoughts in the depths of her heart. Chun-Shi held the little fellow in his arms and didn't speak immediately, but the crowd around them burst into laughter. After hearing the little fellow's wish, a middle-aged man with a child immediately said with a smile, Silly girl, when you get married, how can your parents stay by your side? At that time, you'll want to drive them away. That's right. A married daughter is like spilled water. My child won't come back to accompany us a few times a year unless she is wronged at home. If she doesn't come to accompany you, you can go to her. Do you think she dares to drive you out of the house? Hey, they're busy making grandchildren. How can I disturb them? This conversation also amused the onlookers and made them laugh one after another. However, the little fellow was not happy. She immediately pouted and shouted unhappily, No, I don't want to get married. I want to be with Papa and Mama. forever and ever. After saying that, she even made a face with an unconvinced expression, which immediately made everyone laugh out loud. Oh, your child is so cute. If my child is so cute, I will consider not letting her marry in the future. Don't. You have to ask the child if she is willing to do this first. Otherwise, it will be too late for you to regret it if they elope. Don't jinx it. The crowd of onlookers kept talking, and the atmosphere was very lively. Seeing this, the little fellow pulled Qin Ruoying's hand, pointed to the cake on the table, and shouted, "Mama, I want to eat cake." Silly child. Hearing this, Qin Ruoying rubbed her head with a smile. You are a child, but you don't know that your parents have already taken it seriously. The couple looked at each other silently. After that, Chunshi gently pecked the little fellow's face, then stood up and asked the crowd to eat the cake with Qin Ruoying. Good things naturally had to be shared. There were a lot of people, so the birthday girl was only given a small piece of such a big cake. Although there wasn't much cake, when she saw that everyone was holding her birthday cake, her little face bloomed with joy. So many people were celebrating her birthday with her. She was so happy. After eating the cake, the crowd of onlookers left their blessings and dispersed. The reason why the couple chose to bring the little fellow here for her birthday today was mainly because there was a parent-child camping area in the park. Therefore, when Chunshi opened the rented tent by the lake, the little fellow immediately got in excitedly, and then excitedly turned over and over on the mat. "Papa, come in. Mama, come in, come in." At this moment, it was already evening, and the sky was red. Chapter 328. Some people could become a world-class superstar by playing football, while others could become an Olympic champion by diving. But if one wanted to reach the top of the world in something, it was definitely not something that could be achieved by hard work alone. Everything had to be about talent. Even when playing games, some people could reach the diamond rank after playing for 3 months, while others were still struggling in the silver rank after playing for 3 years. There were geniuses in all walks of life, but in this world, most of them were ordinary people who could not even compare to others in playing games. Qin Ruoying was such an ordinary person. At least, in terms of cultivation, she really did not have any outstanding points. So even with Chunshi, a soul formation expert, training with her all day long, Qin Ruoying's improvement was still so slow. With this kind of cultivation talent, if placed in the Sky Yin God sect, she might not even be as good as the most ordinary outer disciple, but there was no other way. Who asked her to have a strong background? Of course, poor aptitude was one thing. But no matter how bad Qin Ruoying was, she was still a cultivator who had stepped into the foundation establishment stage. Even martial artists could be immune to all kinds of diseases, let alone cultivators. Therefore, when Qin Ruoying said that she was a little dizzy, Chunshi's reaction was obviously a little overboard. As the saying goes, once bitten, twice shy. Perhaps it was because Qin Ruoying had lost her Yin spirit previously. Chunshi now paid extra attention to any abnormal situation. For the sake of caution, Chunshi even used the amplification effect of the soul crystal and carefully checked the situation of Qin Ruoying's soul. Qin Ruoying's Yin spirit had already returned, so no matter how Chunshi looked, he did not find any problems. Could it be, was it really like what Ying said, because she was a little absent-minded just now, so she suddenly felt a little dizzy? Psychological effect? While Chunshi was depressed, the little fellow was secretly paying attention to his expression. As soon as she saw the expression on Chunshi's face slightly relax, this clever little thing eagerly came to his side, then hugged his arm and acted like a spoiled child. "Papa, what's wrong with Mama?" This silly child has learned how to read people's expressions. Seeing this, Chunshi pinched her little face and said with a smile, "Mommy is fine. Let's go. I'll take you to the tea house to play with your brothers." All right. Since Qin Ruoying was indeed fine. Chun-Shi could naturally put down the big stone in his heart. When the family of three walked out of the West Wing again, the thick fog in front of them still hadn't disappeared. The heavenly anomaly this time. Could it have happened in Shangjing? Chun-Shi looked up at the sky and observed for a while. In the end, he did not want to go and investigate. Instead, he carried the little fellow and walked straight into the tea house. Whether it was the recovery of spirit energy or the opening of the heavenly gates, none of this had anything to do with Chun-Shi. Whether it was in the past or in the present, his ambition had never changed, and that was 30 mu of land, a cow, and a warm bed for his wife and children. Just a few simple sayings, but they were enough to describe the ideal life in his heart. While Chun-Shi was busy accompanying his wife and children Siachen Glacier, Beiyao Temple, Chun-Shi had long guessed that someone might come to the Beiyao Temple to check the situation, so he removed the restrictions outside the temple long ago. At the top of the snowy mountain, the wind and snow seemed to never calm down for a moment. The mountain wind whistled past, mixed with bursts of snowflakes fluttering in the air. It was obviously a beautiful dynamic picture, but it gave people a sense of peace and tranquility. At this moment, it seemed that even time had stopped. In the wind and snow, two figures were particularly conspicuous, like two drops of ink on a piece of rice paper. One of them was relatively young, about 30 years old. The other person's hair and beard were all white, and he wore a green robe. He seemed to have a kind of sage-like charm. The young man was holding a bronze mirror in his hand, but the surface of this bronze mirror was dark. But there was something strange about it. There was a metallic luster flowing on the surface of the black mirror. From afar, this bronze mirror looked like a black hole, with a mysterious and wonderful beauty. Master, if the records of the Divination Pavilion are not wrong, the Beiyao Temple should be here. The young man looked around, but under the wind and snow, what could he see except for the white snow? The snow had already drowned everything. The old man frowned and cast his gaze on a snowy area. Immediately after, he gently waved his sleeve, and an invisible force suddenly burst out. Like a stone smashing into water, the accumulated snow on the snowy ground immediately exploded and scattered in all directions, turning into snowflakes that fluttered in the air. Then the old man waved his sleeve again, and a gust of wind suddenly blew in the air. In an instant, the snow that covered the sky and the sun was all blown to another mountaintop. The wind and snow suddenly stopped. A black building suddenly appeared in the old man's line of sight. This unopened sacred hall was like a flower bud waiting to bloom, standing alone on the mountain peak. Seeing this, the young man immediately soared into the air and flew above the hall in the blink of an eye. He held the mirror and looked at the hall. Immediately, as if some mechanism had been activated, a series of kakar rotating sounds could be heard in the hall. Then, this black hall slowly bloomed under the young man's slightly bewildered eyes. This is the Beiyao Temple. The young man landed in the center of the hall and carefully looked at the strange patterns on the floor. But just as he was curious about the things around him, the old man suddenly called out to him, "Wushu, there's no need to look. Let's go." Hearing this, the young man called Wushu immediately flew back to the old man's side and then asked with a puzzled expression, "Master, what happened to this temple? The evil spirit has been destroyed, and the soul crystal has been lost. Without these two cores, the Beiyao Temple can be considered to be completely destroyed. Is there no way to repair it?" "There's no way." The old man shook his head, then suddenly asked, "Wushu, carefully feel the aura here and see if you can sense anything." "Okay." After hearing the old man's words, the young man sat cross-legged in the air, held his breath, and carefully felt the surrounding spirit of heaven and earth. "Master, this place seems to have the aura of Senior Brother Byong. He should have been here before. Is that so?" After the old man glanced at the black lotus below, he waved his sleeve again. The wind and snow all over the sky suddenly surged. The old man did not use true essence to protect his body. Instead, he allowed the goose feather-like snow to continuously fall on his body. Therefore, In a short while, the old man's body was covered with a shallow layer of white snow. They came in a hurry, and they left in a hurry. If I'm not wrong, they're probably dead by now, what? Hearing this, the young man's face couldn't help but change drastically. He looked quite excited and asked, "There is still someone in the lower realm who can hurt senior brother? Why not? Moreover, are you so sure that the person who hurt them must be from the lower realm?" "Master, I don't understand what you mean. If you don't understand, think more." Seeing the old man's serious expression, the young man wisely shut his mouth. Then, the old man thoughtfully looked at the bronze mirror in the young man's hand. "Let's talk about this later. The most important thing now is how to deal with the prophecy left by the divine ancestor. The Baiyao temple is destroyed, and one of the five is missing. Perhaps the divine ancestor expected this to happen back then, so he left this soul mirror behind. Let's go to the All Saints Valley first. I hope nothing happened to the inheritance of Si Ming Xian Nu. That you're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.